A man who lost everything, a woman who built everything, and one drunken moment that changed both their lives forever. She leaned in with champagne on her breath and years of loneliness in her eyes, and he stopped her with the most honest words she'd ever heard. If you were sober right now, I'd already be kissing you. Charlotte Hayes had run boardrooms and crushed competitors without flinching, but no one had ever looked at her the way Ethan Brooks did in that moment, like she was worth waiting for, like she was worth doing right, like comment your city below it. Let's see how far this story travels. The Christmas tree in the lobby of Hayes Creative stood 11 feet tall and was decorated with exactly the kind of deliberate, art-directed perfection that happened when a marketing CEO personally approved the holiday aesthetic. White lights, brushed gold ornaments, a tasteful arrangement of pine cones and eucalyptus sprigs along the base. No tinsel. Charlotte Hayes did not do tinsel. Ethan noticed these things. That was his job. Noticing. He was the senior graphic designer on the creative team, which meant he spent most of his working hours translating other people's vague emotional wants into something you could actually look at on a screen. He was good at it. He was good at reading spaces, reading people, understanding what something was trying to say beneath what it was actually saying. He stood near the far end of the lobby bar that had been assembled for the occasion, holding a glass of sparkling water he hadn't touched and watching the room fill up with people who were louder and looser than they'd been 4 hours ago when the party started. The caterers were working efficiently. The DJ was playing something that sounded like holiday music filtered through an airport lounge. His colleague Dana from account management was attempting to teach the new intern a line dance near the makeshift dance floor, and it was going about as well as anyone could have predicted. Ethan checked his phone. 8:47 p.m. He had promised Mrs. Nguyen next door that he'd be home by 10. She watched Mia on evenings like this. The older woman had essentially appointed herself as Mia's honorary grandmother 18 months ago, shortly after Ethan and his daughter moved into the apartment building. And she took the role with a seriousness that he found both deeply comforting and occasionally terrifying. Mia, who was 6 and very certain about most things, adored her. He thought about calling to check in, then decided against it. Mia was probably asleep already. She went down early on nights when Mrs. Nguyen was in charge because the woman made warm milk with a tiny spoonful of honey, read 2 chapters of whatever book they were working through, and did not negotiate bedtime extensions under any circumstances. Ethan respected this more than he could say. He put his phone back in his jacket pocket and took a small sip of water. "You look like a man counting down the minutes." The voice came from his left, and he turned to find Marcus Webb, the head of the media buying team, leaning against the bar with a beer and the expression of a person who had achieved his optimal level of comfortable intoxication and intended to stay there. Marcus was 43, had been with Hayes Creative for 6 years, and had one of those personalities that expanded naturally in social situations without ever becoming obnoxious about it. Ethan generally liked him. "I'm fine," Ethan said. "You've been standing in this exact spot for 40 minutes. "I found a good spot." Marcus laughed and looked out at the room. "Kid at home?" "Yeah." "How old is she now?" 6, 6.5, according to her. Marcus nodded. "The half matters a lot at that age." He took a drink. "You hire a sitter?" "Mrs. Nguyen from downstairs. She's better with Mia than I am, honestly." "Nobody's better with their kid than they are." "You just don't give yourself credit." Ethan didn't have a response to that, so he didn't offer one. He looked at the tree, he looked at the room, he looked at the crowd moving around the open floor between the lobby and the conference space that had been cleared of furniture for the evening. The whole thing felt warm and well-organized and just slightly hollow in the way that company parties tended to feel when you were an adult who had already survived a number of things that the people around you hadn't. That was an uncharitable thought, and he knew it. These were good people, most of them. He liked his colleagues. He liked his job. He was grateful for it, genuinely, in a way that he tried not to perform, but that sat somewhere near the center of his chest as a quiet, steady thing. 3 years ago, in the 6 months after the accident, he had not been certain he would ever feel genuinely grateful for anything again. That had scared him more than almost everything else. Not the grief itself, but the flatness that followed it. The weeks where Mia would laugh at something, and he would watch her laugh and feel something that he recognized intellectually as love, but that he couldn't quite access from the inside. That had passed. Slowly, and not in a straight line, but it had passed. He was okay. He was on most days more than okay. He had Mia, who was extraordinary in ways he had not fully been prepared for. He had work he was proud of. He had a small apartment that was slightly too cluttered with Mia's drawings and projects and the accumulated evidence of a 6-year-old's enthusiastic relationship with craft supplies. And he had decided a long time ago that this was not a problem. He was okay. He just didn't love company Christmas parties. "There she is," Marcus said, in a tone that wasn't quite reverential but was in the neighborhood. Ethan followed his gaze. Charlotte Hayes had come down from her office. She was wearing a deep green dress. Not Christmas green, something darker and quieter than that, the color of pine needles, with a neckline that was elegant without making a statement about it. Her dark hair was down, which was unusual. At the office, she kept it up, almost always. A clean knot at the back of her head that communicated competence and control without trying to. Down, it changed the architecture of her face slightly. Made her look younger. Not softer exactly, but less armored. She was standing near the entrance of the main space, talking to Simon Park from finance, and she was smiling at something he said with the practiced ease of someone who is very good at the social demands of running a company. Ethan had watched her work a room before. She was precise about it. Not cold, she was genuinely warm in those interactions, but deliberate. She moved through the space with intention. She was 30 years old, and she had built Hayes Creative from a 2-person operation running out of a WeWork in Midtown to a 34-person firm with clients that included 3 national brands and a regional hospital network that everyone in the industry had wanted a piece of for 2 years. She had done this without a trust fund, without inherited connections, and without making the kinds of compromises that people sometimes implied she must have made. Ethan knew this because he had been with the company for 22 months, and he had watched how she operated, and the answer was that she operated like someone who simply worked harder and thought more carefully than most people were willing to. He admired her. He had from fairly early on. That was a professional feeling, or it had started as one. At some point, he couldn't have told you exactly when, it had become something more complicated. "She's been here since 7 this morning," Marcus said, still looking toward Charlotte. 14-hour day, and she shows up to her own party like she just stepped out of a hotel lobby. "She cares about the team," Ethan said. "This is for us, not for her." Marcus looked at him with a small sideways expression. "Yeah." Ethan caught the tone. "What?" "Nothing." Marcus took a drink of his beer. "Nothing, man. Go get a real drink." He didn't get a real drink. He got another sparkling water and moved through a few conversations. A brief exchange with the copywriters about a campaign brief that was due in January. A slightly longer conversation with Priya from the design team about a font licensing issue that neither of them could fully resolve at a party, but that they both apparently needed to discuss anyway, because that was the kind of people they were. He laughed genuinely twice, which he counted as a reasonable outcome for an evening he hadn't been entirely enthusiastic about attending. He had been working his way toward a polite exit when he almost walked directly into Charlotte. She was coming around the edge of the bar, holding a champagne flute that was nearly empty, and she stopped when she saw him with an expression that was half surprise and half something else that resolved, after a moment, into a real smile. Not the polished version, a slightly more off-guard one. "Ethan." She said his name like she was confirming something. "I was hoping you'd be here." "It's a mandatory company event," he said, and then immediately felt like an idiot. But she laughed. A real laugh, brief and unguarded. "Mandatory. Right. God, I hate that we have to frame it that way. I didn't mean it like, I'm glad I came." "You don't have to say that. I'm not just saying it." She looked at him for a second, and the look had something in it that he was careful not to read too directly. Charlotte Hayes was his boss. She was the person who had given him a job at a time when his life was complicated and his references were solid, but his energy, he knew, had not been what it once was. She had taken a chance on him, maybe, or she had simply seen something in his portfolio that she wanted on her team. Either way, he owed her professional clarity, and he tried, consistently, to maintain it. It was not always easy. "The Meridian mock-ups you sent last week," she said. "The third version. I've been thinking about them." The layout issue with the header hierarchy? No, they're good. They're actually, I showed them to Daniel at Meridian on the call Wednesday, and he didn't say anything for about 4 seconds. And then he said, "This is it." He never says that. Ethan didn't know what to do with that exactly, so he said, "That's good to hear. You have a good instinct for what clients actually need versus what they think they want." She turned the champagne glass in her hand. "I don't say that enough to you." "You don't have to." "I know I don't have to." There was something a little impatient in it, but not unkind. "I want to. You do good work, and I'm not always good at remembering to say it out loud." "Thank you," he said, and meant it. She nodded, finished the last of her champagne, set the glass on the bar behind her with the careful deliberateness of someone who was perhaps aware, at some level, that they were managing their relationship with gravity. "How's Mia?" she asked. He was always slightly surprised when she asked about Mia. She'd asked 3 or 4 times over the past several months, not in a perfunctory way, but in a way that suggested she actually remembered details from the previous time he'd mentioned her. He'd once said something offhand about Mia's fixation on a particular documentary series about ocean life, and Charlotte had, 2 weeks later, mentioned in passing that she'd seen a piece about a new marine conservation exhibit at the Natural History Museum and had thought of his daughter. "She's good," he said. "She's at home. Mrs. Nguyen next door is watching her. She's probably been asleep for the last 2 hours." "She's lucky she has you," Charlotte said. He didn't quite know how to take that either. He settled for, "I'm the lucky one." She looked at him with the same direct quality she brought to most things. A way of looking at a person like she was genuinely interested in what was actually there, not just what was being presented. It was one of the things about her that made him like her, back when liking her had felt uncomplicated. It was one of the things that, now, he was careful around. "I should keep making rounds," she said, and there was something in the way she said it that was almost reluctant. "You should eat something. The mushroom things by the left station are actually good. I had 3. "I'll find them." She gave him a small nod and moved off through the crowd. He watched her go for exactly 1 second longer than was strictly necessary, and then he turned back to the bar and looked at his water and thought very carefully about nothing in particular. The next time he saw Charlotte Hayes that evening, it was close to 11 o'clock, and things had changed. Not dramatically. She wasn't a scene. She wasn't causing a disruption. But the party had thinned out considerably. The caterers were quietly consolidating the food stations. The DJ had moved to slower, quieter things. Maybe 15 people remained scattered through the lobby and the adjacent space, the ones who had committed to a full evening and weren't quite ready to let go of it. Charlotte was sitting on one of the decorative benches near the Christmas tree. She had her heels off. They were placed neatly beside her feet, an oddly precise gesture. And she was holding a fresh champagne glass that was already 2/3 empty. She was talking to no one in particular, just sitting. Ethan had gotten his coat from the rack near the elevators. He was genuinely leaving. He had texted Mrs. Nguyen 20 minutes ago and gotten back a thumbs-up emoji that he was fairly sure she'd chosen at random from the options. He should have kept walking. He didn't. He crossed the lobby and stopped a few feet from the bench. "You okay?" Charlotte looked up. Her eyes took a second to fully locate him, which told him something about how the evening had progressed for her since their earlier conversation. She smiled. "Ethan?" "Yeah." "You're leaving?" "It's after 11. I need to get home." "Right." She looked at the coat in his hands. "Mia." "Mia." He paused. Do you need anything? Do you have a car?" "I have the app on my phone. I'm fine." A beat. "Sit with me for 1 minute." He should not have sat down. He sat down. The bench was narrow enough that their proximity was present. She smelled like champagne and something quieter underneath it, something that was just her, and he was aware that he had somehow not been prepared for this exact configuration of circumstances. Sitting here with the party winding down around them and the tree lights doing what tree lights did. "Do you like working here?" Charlotte asked. She was looking at the tree, not at him, and the question came out with a kind of odd directness that he associated with people who had lowered their usual filters. "Yeah, I do." "You're not just saying it." "Why would I just say it?" She turned to look at him then. There was something unguarded in her face that he rarely saw during working hours. Not the professional warmth she was genuinely capable of. This was something more uncertain than that, more undefended. I don't know, she said. People say things. I like the work. I like the team. The clients are mostly reasonable. He paused. I like the company. The company, she said, and there was something slightly wry in it, like she was testing whether that word meant what she thought it might. Yeah. She held his gaze for a second, and then something shifted in her expression, something that moved from uncertain to something else, and she leaned forward. Later, Ethan would think about that moment and identify it as one of the very few instances in his adult life where his instincts and his intentions had moved at exactly the same speed, in exactly the right direction, without any hesitation or second guessing. He put his hand up, gently, no alarm in it, and it landed lightly on her shoulder. She stopped. She blinked at him. The room wasn't spinning for her, not literally, but the moment had the quality of a gear clicking slightly out of place. Charlotte, his voice was quiet and completely even. You've had a lot of champagne. She stared at him. Something flickered across her face, embarrassment beginning to form, or maybe just recalibration. I know, she said. And I think, he continued, keeping his voice at exactly the same level, that whatever this is, you deserve to be clear-headed when it happens. She was very still now. Because if you were sober right now, he said, I'd be the one making the first move. The lobby was quiet enough that he could hear the tree lights hum faintly. They sometimes did that, an electrical murmur that you only caught when things got quiet enough. Charlotte was looking at him with an expression he couldn't fully categorize. It wasn't embarrassment, or not just that. It was something more complex, like a person who had stepped out expecting a familiar kind of ground and found something different under their feet. Ethan, you should go home, he said, not unkindly. He stood up, straightened his jacket, and picked his coat up from where he'd laid it. Let me call your car. I can call my own. I know you can. Let me. She didn't argue. He took out his phone and opened the app she used. She'd had him coordinate a car for a client once, and he remembered the service she used, and got a driver confirmed for a 3-minute arrival. He showed her the screen. She looked at it, then up at him, with an expression that had gone quiet in a way that was almost hard to look at directly. Thank you, she said. Her voice was smaller than usual. Don't thank me. Why not? Because what I said was true, he said, and that means this isn't over. It's just waiting for the right conditions. The driver arrived in 4 minutes, not 3. Ethan stood with her in the lobby until she was in the car. She didn't say anything else. Neither did he. The car pulled away from the curb, and he stood in the cold for a moment, watching the taillights. Then he called a cab and went home to his daughter. Mia was asleep, as expected, on her side in the small bed with the constellation nightlight turning slow patterns on the ceiling. Mrs. Nguyen had left a note on the kitchen counter. She was good. Ate her whole dinner. She asked me to tell you she loves you, so you don't worry. There was a small drawing clipped to the note. Mia had made it sometime during the evening, a house with a sun above it and 3 stick figures out front, one of them clearly smaller than the others, one of them holding what appeared to be a very large briefcase. Ethan sat at the kitchen table for a while before going to bed. He thought about the way Charlotte had looked at him when he said this isn't over, the way she'd gone still. Not because she was drunk. She was past the worst of it by that point, he thought. Mostly just tired and a little reckless in the way that people got after a long year had finally tipped into a holiday evening. She'd gone still because the words had landed somewhere. He'd known, even as he said them, that he was doing something irreversible. You didn't say something like that to your boss without accepting that the relationship had shifted in some fundamental way, regardless of what happened next. He'd known it, and he'd said it anyway because it was true. And because Charlotte Hayes, in his experience, responded to honesty more than almost anything. She was a person who had spent considerable effort building things on ground that was real, and she tended to recognize that quality when she found it. He didn't know what was going to happen. He genuinely didn't. There were too many things in the way. The professional reality, the gap in their positions, his own life with Mia, and everything that entailed. He knew better than to project forward, but he knew what he'd felt standing in that lobby. He knew that it wasn't new, that it had been building for a while in the way that honest things built. Not dramatically, not as a sudden revelation, but as a slow accumulation of specific moments. The way she'd asked about Mia and actually remembered what he'd said. The way she'd looked at the Meridian mock-ups and told him what she actually thought, directly, without the editorial softening that some managers defaulted to. The way, at the party tonight, she'd looked slightly reluctant when she said she had to keep making rounds, like she'd rather have stayed. Ethan was not a person who fell quickly or lightly. That was not a recent development. It was just who he was. He moved slowly toward things because he had learned, at considerable cost, that moving too fast and not looking clearly enough at what you were moving toward had consequences that outlasted the original decision by years. But he had looked. He'd been looking, carefully, for a long time. And what he saw was a real person, with real complications, who built things out of genuine effort and ran toward hard things instead of away from them, and who, sometimes, in unguarded moments, looked like someone who had been alone for longer than she'd intended to be. He went to check on Mia one more time before he went to bed. She was still on her side, still breathing in the deep, uncomplicated way of children who don't yet have enough history to carry into their sleep. He stood in the doorway for a minute. The constellation light made slow circles on the ceiling. He thought, whatever happens, she comes first. That wasn't a limit. It was just the truth of his life, and he'd long since stopped experiencing it as a sacrifice. Mia was the best part of who he was. Any future he built had to be built around that, and anyone who couldn't understand that wasn't someone who was actually seeing him. He went to bed. He didn't sleep well, but that was okay. He hadn't expected to. The first 2 days after the Christmas party were strange. Hayes Creative had a skeleton staff through the holidays. Most of the team was working reduced hours or taking the weeks before New Year's largely off. Ethan came in on the 22nd because he had a deadline on a brand refresh project that couldn't really wait, and because if he was honest with himself, staying home had its own complications. Mia was on winter break and was staying with his sister Joanne for several days, an annual arrangement that Joanne had initiated the previous year with the cheerful authority of someone who had decided what was going to happen and was simply informing you of it. He was grateful. He was also, without Mia's practical demands to organize his days around, slightly at loose ends. The office was quiet. The lobby had been returned to its normal configuration. The Christmas tree was still there, but the party infrastructure was gone, and the space felt like itself again. He sat at his desk in the corner of the creative suite and worked with a focus that he recognized as partially genuine and partially displacement. Charlotte was in. Her office light was on. He'd seen it through the glass walls when he'd passed by, and he'd also, to his own mild irritation, noticed that she'd seen him at the same moment, and they'd both done the thing where you acknowledge the person and then redirect your attention with a slight overcommitment that communicates, fairly clearly, that the acknowledgement cost you something. By mid-afternoon of the first day, he'd decided that he was going to be normal about this. Whatever the normal was now, he'd find it and stand in it. It was a good company. He liked his work. Charlotte Hayes was his employer, and they were both adults. And she had probably woken up on the morning of the 22nd with a clear head and a thorough desire to walk back to the previous side of a line that he'd nudged, somewhat one-sidedly, out of position. That was fine. He could work with that. He'd just be normal. He managed to be normal for approximately 3 days. On the 24th, the last working day before the holiday, he was packing up his desk around 3 in the afternoon when he heard her office door open. The creative suite was empty except for him. Everyone else had already gone. He kept his attention on what he was doing, which was putting his laptop into his bag and making sure he had the project files on the right drive. And he was doing a very solid job of focusing on these tasks when she stopped at the door of the suite. "Ethan." He looked up. She was standing in the doorway with her arms crossed, not defensively, more like she was holding herself together physically. And she looked like she'd been working on what she was going to say for a while and still wasn't fully satisfied with it. "I want to apologize," she said, "for the other night. I was unprofessional, and I put you in an uncomfortable position, and I'm sorry." He looked at her for a moment. "You don't have to apologize." I was your boss leaning in to, I know what was happening. I was there. His voice was even. Not unkind, but not letting her construct the whole story herself. And I told you what I told you. That wasn't me being nice, Charlotte. I meant it. She uncrossed her arms, crossed them again. That doesn't make the situation simpler. No, he agreed. It doesn't. I've been avoiding you. She said it like it cost her something to admit, which is ridiculous because it's my company and you haven't done anything wrong, and avoiding you makes this worse, not better. A little bit ridiculous, yeah. She almost smiled. You could let me be uncomfortable without pointing it out. You don't like being let off the hook. I've worked here for almost 2 years. She looked at him, and something in her expression shifted. The braced quality of it loosened just slightly. That's very annoying, she said. I know. There was a pause. The office was quiet enough that the building's HVAC was audible, a low, constant undertone. What did you mean, she said, when you said it wasn't over, that it was just waiting for the right conditions? He'd had several days to think about this. He'd thought about it more than he'd have preferred to admit. I meant exactly that, he said. I'm not going to pretend I don't have feelings here, because I do, and I think you know it, and pretending otherwise would be insulting to both of us. But I also know what's complicated about it, and I'm not interested in something that starts in a bad place just because we were close enough to it one night. I want to do it right, if we're going to do it. She was very still in the doorway. The afternoon light through the office's high windows made her look. He didn't let himself go too far down that direction. I have feelings here too, she said. It came out slightly stiff, like she was reading a sentence she'd rehearsed and wasn't sure she'd read correctly. I know, he said. I'm not good at this. She said it without self-pity, just as a fact she was presenting because it was accurate. I'm not. Relationships are not where I'm. She paused. I'm good at work. I know that too. That's a problem. It's a thing, he said. It's not necessarily a problem. He picked up his bag. Are you going home for the holidays? The question landed like a slight course correction, and she accepted it. My parents. 2 days in New Jersey. You? Mia's at my sister's right now. I'm picking her up tomorrow, and then we're doing Christmas at the apartment. Low key. She'll love that. She's already been asking about the cookie situation for a week and a half. Charlotte's expression did something complicated and warm that she didn't quite manage to contain. Tell her I said happy holidays. I will. He moved toward the door. She stepped back into the hallway to let him pass, and they were briefly standing close, not dramatically, just the ordinary proximity of a hallway. And he could see in her face the same awareness that he felt, the same recognition of what was sitting between them, like something solid and unnamed. Ethan, she said as he moved past her. He stopped. I'm glad you stopped me, she said. At the party. I'm glad. He turned to look at her. I know you are. She nodded once, like something had been confirmed. He took the elevator down and walked out into the December cold, and he thought about the way she'd said, I have feelings here too. Stiff, over-rehearsed, entirely unpolished. And he thought, yes, exactly. That's precisely it. That's what's real about her. And he walked to his car with the complicated, cautious, quietly insistent feeling of a man who knows that something is beginning and cannot yet see the shape of what it will become. The Christmas lights on the street came on all at once as he reached his car. One of those timed things, the city coordinating its own seasonal aesthetics, and for a moment the whole street looked like something that meant something, and he let himself feel that for one moment before he got in the car and drove home. The new year arrived without fanfare, at least in Ethan's apartment. He and Mia had spent New Year's Eve the same way they'd spent the last two. Takeout from the Thai place 3 blocks over. A movie that Mia chose and that ran 45 minutes longer than Ethan had anticipated, and a quiet countdown that Mia made it to approximately 11:47 before falling asleep on the couch, with her head on his arm. He'd carried her to bed, gone back to the living room, and watched the last few minutes of the year alone with a half-eaten container of Pad See Ew and the particular feeling of a person who is content and slightly lonely at the same time and has made a kind of peace with the fact that both things can be true simultaneously. January 2nd, Hayes Creative came back to life. The office filled up again, conversations in hallways, the coffee machine running constantly, the shared drive filling with updated files and new briefs. The creative team had a campaign kickoff meeting at 9 in the morning, and Ethan sat at the conference table and took notes and contributed where it made sense. And the whole thing had the ordinary rhythm of a working week in January, which was to say slightly sluggish and slightly optimistic at the same time. Charlotte ran the meeting. She was professional, fully, completely, without obvious effort. She moved through the agenda with her usual directness, asked sharp questions, and assigned responsibilities in the clear, specific way she had of doing it that left no one uncertain about what they were supposed to do. She did not avoid looking at Ethan. She also did not look at him any differently than she looked at anyone else in the room, which was itself a kind of deliberateness that he recognized and filed away without comment. After the meeting, he went back to his desk and worked. She went back to her office and presumably did the same. This was how the first 2 weeks of January went. It wasn't bad exactly. It was careful. There was a quality to it, like two people navigating a space that had slightly rearranged itself while they were both away, and both of them trying to move through the new configuration without drawing attention to the fact that it had changed. He thought she was managing it reasonably well. He thought he was managing it reasonably well. He also thought that reasonably well was doing a lot of work in that sentence, and that they both knew it. The thing that finally broke the managed distance wasn't dramatic. It was a Thursday afternoon in the third week of January, and Ethan was in the small kitchen adjacent to the creative suite, making a cup of coffee, and Charlotte came in to refill her water bottle, and they were both standing in a 10-by-8 room and there was nobody else in it, and the particular quality of the silence between them was suddenly very hard to misread. She filled her water bottle. He poured his coffee. Neither of them said anything for a moment that lasted approximately 4 seconds and felt considerably longer. "This is ridiculous," he said. She didn't pretend not to know what he was talking about. "I know. We're adults. I know that too. And we've been doing this thing where we're very professionally normal with each other, which is actually the least normal we've been since I started working here." She leaned against the counter with her water bottle in her hand and looked at him with the expression of a person who knew she was being accurately described and was deciding how to respond to it. "I don't know how to do this, Ethan. I told you that." "I know you did. I'm not criticizing. I'm saying the current approach isn't working for me." "What do you want me to do?" "Talk to me. Like you did before the party." She was quiet for a second. "That's what got us here." "Yeah," he said. "And here isn't a bad place. Here is just here. It's real. I'd rather be in a real place than a comfortable fiction." She looked at him for a long moment. The kitchen had a window that faced the building's interior courtyard, a mostly featureless concrete space with 2 sad-looking planters that someone had given up on sometime during the previous summer. The light that came through was gray and January honest, and it made the whole room feel like a conversation that was going to go somewhere whether they wanted it to or not. "Okay," she said, finally. "Okay, what?" "Okay. Let's talk. Like before." He picked up his coffee. "Not here, though. The kitchen is approximately the size of a large closet." Something in her expression loosened. The held-together quality, the braced-for-impact quality. She almost smiled. "There's a decent place 2 blocks over. Good enough coffee, usually empty at lunch." "Tomorrow?" he said. "Tomorrow," she said. The place was called Millstone, and it was the kind of coffee shop that existed in a particular equilibrium. Not trying too hard, not falling apart. Good enough lighting, tables spaced well, a corner that offered a view of the street without putting you fully on display to it. Charlotte was already there when Ethan arrived, 7 minutes early, which told him she'd been earlier than that. She had a coffee. She had her coat on the chair next to her. She had the slightly over-prepared look of a person who had been sitting there long enough to wonder if they'd miscalculated, and the relief in her expression when he walked in was something she didn't fully manage to conceal, which he found quietly endearing. "You're early," he said, sitting across from her. "I had a call cancel." It was not very convincing. "Sure. He took off his jacket. How long? 20 minutes. Don't. I'm not saying anything. You're doing the thing where you look like you're not saying anything, but the not saying is very loud. A server came by, and he ordered, and when she'd gone, Charlotte turned her coffee cup in both hands and said, I've been thinking. About? About what you said. In December. Both things. In the lobby and then in the office. She paused. I'm not good at the personal part of things. You should know that going in. I'm not withholding it as some kind of warning. I'm just... She stopped. I grew up with parents who ran their marriage like a well-managed project. Everything scheduled, everything functional. I never really learned the other way. He waited, because she wasn't done. And I built this company, which I'm proud of, and I'm not complaining about it. But it took everything I had for a long time. And somewhere in that process, I got very comfortable with the part of life that I was good at, and less comfortable with everything else. That's honest, he said. I'm trying to be. I know. He picked up his coffee when it arrived. Can I say something? That's sort of why we're here. The things you're describing, the not knowing how, the having put everything into the work, none of that scares me. I don't need someone who has everything figured out. I had that expectation once, I think, in a younger version of myself, and life did a very thorough job of demonstrating that it was the wrong thing to want. She looked at him. I just need someone who's honest, who shows up, who doesn't run when something gets hard. He set down the cup. You came in on the 22nd when most of your team was already gone. You've been in this building more hours than anyone who works for you. You walked into that kitchen Thursday and told me the current approach wasn't working instead of just enduring it. That's not a person who doesn't know how to show up. Charlotte was quiet for a moment. Outside the window, a man walked by holding a very small dog inside his coat. The January street had that particular reduced quality. Fewer people, faster pace, everyone slightly hunched against the cold. What does this look like? She said. Practically. You have Mia, I have the company, there's the work situation. I've thought about that. And? And I think we keep it private, from the team. Not because I'm ashamed of anything, I want to be clear about that, but because professional dynamics are what they are, and neither of us needs the complications. Marcus already looks at me like he knows something, Charlotte said. Marcus looks at everyone like he knows something. It's how he moves through the world. She laughed. Brief. Genuine. That's true. A pause. And Mia? He took his time with this. She's the most important thing in my life. I don't introduce people to Mia until I'm certain they're going to be in our lives consistently, not as a test. Just because she's 6 and she gets attached and I've spent a lot of energy building her a stable world. Charlotte nodded slowly. That makes sense. It might take a while before that happens. I want to be upfront about that. I understand. She said it without visible hurt, which surprised him slightly. He'd expected at least a flicker of something, but her expression was careful and honest. I want to earn that. I'm not asking you to fast-track anything. He looked at her. There was something in the way she said I want to earn that carried weight. Not performed, not seeking reassurance, just a plain acknowledgement of where they were and what it would take. Okay, he said. Okay, she said. They stayed for another hour. They talked about the company and the Meridian account, and a brief that Ethan thought had structural problems, and Charlotte agreed with but was navigating diplomatically. They talked about Mia's current phase of asking questions about the ocean that Ethan couldn't always answer, and Charlotte mentioned that she'd grown up near the coast in a tone that was neither casual nor particularly guarded, just honest, and he filed it away. They talked about Marcus and his apparently encyclopedic knowledge of every decent bar within 4 blocks of the office. They talked, in short, like two people who had been talking around something for months and had finally decided to just talk, and the conversation had the specific relief of that, loose and actual and occasionally funny in ways that didn't need to be funny, just were. When they walked back to the office, they didn't touch. There was no gesture. Just 2 people returning to work on a Friday in January, close enough that their shoulders were within a few inches of each other as they moved down the sidewalk, neither of them commenting on it. What followed was not a sweep of romantic escalation. It was more like accumulation. Coffee on Fridays became a standing thing, first at Millstone and then rotating to a few other places within walking distance, depending on who got there first and what looked quiet. They texted occasionally about work things, and then, gradually, not only about work things. He sent her a link to an article about an ocean conservation project in the Pacific, and she responded at 11:30 at night with 3 paragraphs about coral bleaching that were clearly coming from someone who'd just gone down a research spiral. He found this deeply characteristic of her and said so, and she responded with a voice note, only the second one she'd ever sent him, of approximately 4 seconds of her laughing in a way that sounded like it surprised her. February brought a campaign deadline that hit the creative team like a weather event. 2 weeks of long hours, late submissions, a client who changed their mind about the color palette with 4 days remaining, and Ethan spending the better part of a Thursday rebuilding assets he'd already completed twice. Charlotte appeared in the creative suite at 7:30 one evening with 2 sandwiches from the deli around the corner and set one on his desk without a word, and he looked up from his screen and said, "You didn't have to do that." And she said, "I was downstairs anyway," which was demonstrably not true given that her coat was on, and he said, "Thank you." And she sat on the edge of Priya's unoccupied desk, and they ate in silence for a while with the rest of the floor empty around them. It was not a glamorous moment. The sandwich was decent, but not remarkable. Ethan had been staring at a screen for 6 hours and was aware that he was not at his most compelling. Charlotte had a stress line between her eyebrows that had been there for most of the previous week, and that she didn't bother to smooth out. They talked about the deadline and the client, and whether the color palette change was really as catastrophic as it felt in the moment. She told him about a pitch she'd given at 24, the first one for a client she'd actually cared about landing, and how she'd mispronounced the client's name for the entire first half of the presentation and only found out afterward because her then partner had told her, laughing, in the elevator going down. "What did you do?" Ethan asked. "I sent a handwritten note the next day and spelled the name correctly 4 times in it." She finished the last of her sandwich. "We got the account." "Of course you did." "The note was good." "I don't doubt it." She looked at him then, in the low light of the mostly empty floor, and the expression was different from the ones she used in meetings or in managing rounds at a party mode. It was just her. A 30-year-old person sitting on someone else's desk eating a deli sandwich at 7:30 in the evening because she'd walked around the corner specifically to bring dinner to someone and hadn't wanted to make it into a thing. "The note was really good," she said, softer. "I believe you," he said, and meant it. He told Joanne in late February. Not planned. His sister had a way of extracting information by simply asking direct questions with the patience of someone who had all day and was not going anywhere, which was a quality she'd had since childhood and that Ethan had never successfully defended against. She'd come over for Sunday dinner, and Mia had been holding court at the table about a project she was doing in school involving the water cycle. And afterward, Mia had gone to take a bath, and Joanne had looked at her brother across the cleared table and said, "So, what's going on with you?" "Nothing." "Ethan, I'm serious. You've checked your phone 4 times in the last hour. You don't check your phone at dinner." He hadn't realized he'd done it. He put his phone face down on the table. Joanne waited. "There's someone," he said. His sister's expression was careful. She knew better than to light up or make it into something large. "Okay," she said. "It's complicated. She's my boss." "How complicated?" "We're figuring it out, privately. Nobody at work knows. We haven't. It's still early." Joanne was quiet for a moment. "Are you okay?" "Yeah. I mean, actually, okay." He thought about it honestly, the way he'd learned to over the last 3 years, not the reflexive answer, the actual one. "I think so. It scares me a little, but not in a way that makes me want to stop." "Does she know about Kara?" "She knows I was widowed. She hasn't asked beyond that, and I haven't pushed it." "She'll need to know. Eventually." "I know." Joanne picked up her water glass. "What's she like?" Ethan thought for a second. "She built her company from scratch. She's one of the sharpest people I've ever worked with. She's not smooth. She doesn't pretend to be things she isn't, and she's not always comfortable, and she's better at giving than receiving." He paused. "She brought me a sandwich on a Thursday when I was on deadline and then pretended she'd been in the area. Joanne looked at him with a very specific expression. Older sister, long practice, clear eyes. She sounds like a project, she said. Not unkindly. Most worthwhile things are. Does Mia know anything? No, not yet. I need to be sure before that happens. Sure of what? He looked at the table. That she's going to stay. Joanne didn't respond right away. The bathwater was running down the hall, and they could hear Mia narrating something to herself. She had an extensive internal world that she managed largely out loud, which Ethan had come to regard as one of her finest qualities. That's a good standard, Joanne said finally. Don't lower it. I don't intend to. Tit. March came and the campaign delivered, and the client, even the difficult one, was satisfied, and the office exhaled collectively, and someone brought in cupcakes on the Friday after the final submission went out, which was the kind of thing that Hayes Creative did because Charlotte had established a culture that acknowledged completed work as worth acknowledging. Ethan ate a cupcake at his desk and sent her a message that said, "Only nice work on the Kellner account," and she sent back, "You did most of it." And he said, "You made the call on the deadline extension that saved all of it," and she sent back a period, just a single period, which he'd come to recognize as her version of accepting something without being able to quite say so directly. On a Saturday in late March, they went to a museum. Not a date exactly, or not announced as one. She had mentioned offhandedly during one of their Friday coffees that the Natural History Museum had an exhibit on deep-sea ecosystems that she'd been thinking about seeing, and he'd said that Mia had been asking about exactly that kind of thing. And then they'd both paused, and he'd said, "She's with my sister this weekend." "Oh," Charlotte said. A beat. "Do you want to go?" he said. "Saturday?" She looked at her coffee cup. "To the museum." "To the museum?" "Sure," she said. "Yeah." It was not how either of them would have scripted a first date, probably. The museum was moderately crowded. The deep-sea exhibit was genuinely interesting, and Charlotte knew more about it than Ethan had expected, which he probably should have anticipated given the 1130 coral bleaching text. They stood in front of a large display about hydrothermal vents, and she talked about the chemosynthesis process, with the specific focus of someone who had been thinking about this particular thing for longer than the question warranted. And Ethan listened and watched her face change when she was talking about something she actually cared about. The slight animation, the way she'd stop partway through a sentence to get it right, and felt with clear and uncomplicated certainty that he was in exactly the right place. Afterward, they got food from a place she knew nearby, a corner spot with good soup and bad lighting, and a menu that had clearly not been updated since approximately 2011. They sat across from each other and talked for 2.5 hours. He told her about Kara, really told her, not the summary version, the actual version, who she'd been, how they'd met when they were both 24 and neither of them was ready for something serious, and had proceeded anyway because it was too real to be careful about, how the accident had happened on a Tuesday in October 3 years ago on a road she'd driven 100 times, how he'd had to figure out how to tell a 3-year-old that her mother wasn't coming home. Charlotte didn't say anything for a moment after he finished. Then she said, "How did you get through it?" "Mia," he said simply. "She needed me to get through it." That's not a beautiful answer, but it's the honest one. "It's a real answer," Charlotte said. "Those are better." He looked at her. "What about you? How did you get from wherever you started to the company you have now?" "A lot of it I didn't tell you yet," she said. "You don't have to tonight." "I know." She looked at the table for a second. "My parents split when I was 15. It was not... They weren't dramatic about it. That was almost worse. Everything just got very quiet and managed and efficient, and I think I decided somewhere in there that the only thing I could trust was what I built myself." She said it matter-of-factly, without the performance of pain. "The company is mine. It's the one thing I know how to hold." "You're learning to hold other things," he said. She looked at him, and the look was unguarded in the specific way it was when he said something accurate that she hadn't fully given herself permission to know yet. "Yeah," she said, "maybe." He paid for dinner. She argued about it, and he pointed out that she'd had the membership card for the museum and he hadn't, and the math worked out, and she accepted this with the expression of someone making a concession on technical grounds. They walked back to the street where their cars were parked. The March evening was cold and damp, the kind of cold that felt less like winter and more like something between. She stopped at her car and turned to face him, and there was a moment of two people standing on a sidewalk who both knew what the moment was. He closed the distance, not quickly, not dramatically, and kissed her. Just that. No build-up speech, no announcement of intent, just a person who had been careful for a long time making a decision. She kissed him back. When they separated, neither of them said anything profound. She made a small sound that was not quite a laugh and not quite a breath, but somewhere between. He looked at her face in the wet pavement light of a March night in the city and thought, yes, this is real. This is the actual thing. I'll see you Monday, she said, and her voice was not quite steady. See you Monday, he said. He drove home with the windows down despite the cold, which was not a thing he normally did, and which he would not have been able to fully explain to anyone who asked. April was the month that things began to feel incrementally like something that existed, not hidden exactly, but private, which was different. They were careful at work in the ways they'd agreed to be, and it was not as difficult as Ethan had anticipated because the foundation of how they interacted professionally had always been genuine and hadn't changed. She was his employer. He was her employee. Neither of those things had stopped being true, and the honesty that had been the quality of their professional relationship translated, mostly, into the personal one. What he hadn't fully expected was how much he would learn about Charlotte Hayes when there was no work agenda to structure the time. She could not cook. This was not a manageable limitation. It was comprehensive, and she was aware of it without embarrassment, which was itself characteristic. She ordered from a rotation of 3 or 4 places in her neighborhood and regarded this as a solved problem. She ran in the mornings, not as a discipline, but because she'd done it for years, and it was one of the few activities she engaged in without thinking about outcomes. She had strong opinions about coffee that were calibrated in ways he found both excessive and admirable. She was a good listener when she was paying attention, and a catastrophically absent listener when she was in a problem-solving loop in her head, which she'd interrupt herself to acknowledge when she caught it. She was not smooth. She did not glide through emotional terrain. She moved through it like someone who had not done a lot of hiking and was going anyway, sometimes too careful, sometimes not careful enough, occasionally stopping in the middle of something to recalibrate. She was the most real person he'd been close to in a long time. One evening in the second week of April, they were at his apartment. Mia was at a school friend's house for a birthday sleepover, and Charlotte was sitting at his kitchen table looking at the drawings on the refrigerator while Ethan finished cleaning up after the dinner he'd made, which was pasta because it was one of 3 things he could do reliably well and without stress. She was quiet in the way she sometimes was, not disengaged but processing something. She drew those? Charlotte asked. Yeah. The sun and house one is from December. The one with the fish is from last month, the ocean unit in school. Charlotte was looking at the fish drawing. It was ambitious for a 6-year-old, dense with sea creatures and detail that went beyond what most kids that age attempted, though Mia's horse had about 9 legs and her sharks had expressions that might generously be described as philosophical. She's got something, Charlotte said. Not patronizing, genuine. She does. He dried his hands on the dish towel. She's her own person. She has been since she could talk. I don't think I made her. I think she just arrived that way. Charlotte turned from the refrigerator to look at him. She'd been sitting with her knees pulled up to her chest, which was a thing she did when she was relaxed, which he'd only recently started seeing. Are you scared? She said. Of this. Of introducing us. Yes, he said. A little. Not of you. Of getting it wrong for her. How would you know when it's right? He thought about it honestly. When I'm certain you're not going anywhere, he said. When I look at this and I think, this is where it's going, this is what it's becoming, and it's not fragile. I'm not there yet, but I'm not far. Charlotte looked at him steadily. Okay, she said. Just, okay? I'm not rushing it. I meant what I said in January. She paused. I want to earn it. I'm working on it. He looked at her at his kitchen table, in the ordinary light of an ordinary Wednesday evening, and thought about the word earn and what it cost a person like Charlotte Hayes to use it without flinching. You're doing fine, he said. She made the face she made when she was accepting something she didn't quite believe yet, but was trying to. Don't tell me that too many times, or I'll start to trust it. That's the idea, he said. She looked back at the refrigerator, at the fish drawing with the 9-legged horse in the corner and the philosophical sharks. Tell me more about her, she said. I want to know. So he did. By May, Ethan had stopped counting the weeks. Not because things had become careless, they hadn't, but because the relationship had moved past the phase where he needed to track its progress as evidence that it was real. It was real. That much had settled into certainty the way that honest things did, not with a single dramatic moment of clarity, but with the slow, unglamorous accumulation of ordinary evenings and difficult conversations and the specific quality of being with a person who didn't perform a version of themselves for your benefit. Charlotte still did not cook. She had, on one occasion in late April, attempted to make eggs at his apartment and produce something that was technically edible if you were not particular about texture, and Mia, who had not yet met Charlotte, who did not yet know that Charlotte existed in the way she existed, would have called it an adventure, which was her word for food that required courage. Ethan had eaten it without comment, and Charlotte had looked at the result with the expression of a person conducting a post-incident assessment and said, I think the heat was wrong. And he'd said, I think so too. And she'd said, I'm not going to get better at this. And he'd said, I know, and I genuinely don't need you to. And something about that exchange had landed between them as a small, solid thing. The morning the rumor started, it was a Tuesday in the second week of May. Ethan arrived at the office at 8:15 and knew within 20 minutes that something had shifted in the atmospheric pressure of the building. It was not obvious. Hayes Creative was not a dramatic workplace, not a gossip-forward culture, and Charlotte had built a team of people who were mostly professionals about their professional lives. But there was a quality to the Tuesday morning that was different from the Monday morning, a slightly altered quality in the way that certain conversations stopped when he walked through a door, a slight recalibration in how a few people held themselves around him. He went to his desk and opened his files and worked for an hour and a half without addressing it, because addressing it required knowing what it was, and he didn't yet. Marcus appeared at the edge of the creative suite at 10:15 with 2 coffees, which was unusual enough that Ethan looked up. One of those mine? Ethan said. If you want it. Marcus set it on the desk and sat in the chair that Priya used during the afternoon, which she wasn't in yet. He looked like a man who had thought about how to start a conversation and was now finding the preparation insufficient. What's going on? Ethan said. Marcus picked up his own coffee. You know I don't get into people's personal situations. I know you say that. I mean it, generally. Marcus. People are talking. He said it plainly, which Ethan appreciated. I don't know who started it or where it came from, but as of this morning, there's a thing going around about you and Charlotte. Ethan looked at him. I'm not asking, Marcus said. What you do is your business. I'm telling you because you're going to notice it today, and I'd rather you hear it from me. What exactly are people saying? That you're involved, romantically. He paused. Some of them are connecting it to the Meridian account. That landed harder than the first part. Ethan sat with it for a second. The Meridian account, he said. You were the lead designer. It's the biggest win the company has had this year. Some people are doing math. Marcus's voice was careful and entirely without judgment. I'm not one of them, but I want you to know the math exists. Ethan looked at his screen, at the work files open and waiting. He thought about Charlotte in her office 2 floors up, probably already in a meeting or already working through her morning with the same focused efficiency she brought to every Tuesday. And he thought about the Meridian mock-ups, the third version, the one Daniel had looked at for 4 seconds before saying, this is it. And the particular quality of being good at your job and having someone subtract that from you because of who you were close to. Thanks for telling me, he said. You're good at what you do, Marcus said. I want you to know I said that to 2 people this morning before I came up here. I appreciate it. Marcus took his coffee and left. And Ethan sat for a moment, and then he took out his phone and sent Charlotte a message that said, The thing we were hoping to avoid may have started. I think we need to talk today. Her response came 4 minutes later. My office, noon, closed the door. Untent. She was at her desk when he came in, and she was in the particular mode that she had when something had gone sideways and she was managing herself around it. Very still, very focused, the stress line back between her eyebrows. She gestured to the chair across from her and he sat down and closed the door behind him. "How bad is it on your end?" she said. No preamble. "Marcus told me this morning. The Meridian account is part of it." Her jaw tightened slightly. "Of course it is. How did you find out?" "Simon from finance came to me at 9. He was trying to be tactful, which meant the conversation took twice as long." She picked up a pen and set it down again. "He wanted to know if there were any HR considerations he should be aware of. That's when I understood the scope." "What did you tell him?" "That I would handle it appropriately and would let him know if anything required formal documentation." She looked at Ethan, which is the honest answer because I don't actually know yet what appropriate looks like. "We need to address it," he said. "I don't want to, but ignoring it makes it worse." "I know." She put her hands flat on the desk. "The Meridian piece, I need you to understand that has nothing to do with us. You got that account because your work was the best work submitted by anyone on the team, and because the client responded to it, and because you understood what they needed before they could articulate it. I know that. I need you to actually know it, not just say you know it." He looked at her steadily. "Charlotte, I know it. I'm not questioning my own work." She held his gaze for a second, then exhaled. "I'm not worried about you. I'm worried about you having to defend it." "I can defend it." "You shouldn't have to." "Welcome to reality," and he said, not unkindly. "People connect dots. Sometimes the dots aren't the story, but you still have to address them." She was quiet. Outside her office, through the glass wall, the floor moved normally. People at desks, someone heading to the printer, the visible, ordinary life of the company she'd built. He watched her watch it for a moment. "I'm not ashamed of this," she said, quietly, but with a firmness under it. "I want to be clear about that. I'm not handling this as something to be ashamed of. I know. But I also know that some people are going to look at this and see what they want to see, and I can't control that." She picked up the pen again. "What I can control is whether this company knows that every hire I make, every account I assign, every piece of work that goes out under this name is on merit. That's not negotiable." "What are you thinking?" "I'm thinking I call a team meeting, not to make a speech about my personal life, that's not what this is, but to address the culture question directly. That work here is assigned and evaluated on quality, period." She paused. "And I think you address the Meridian piece directly if it comes up. Walk through the work. Let it speak." "I can do that." "The thing about you, Ethan," she said, and her voice shifted slightly, still direct but with something underneath it, "is that when your work is in front of people, it doesn't need defending. It just needs to be seen." He was quiet for a moment. "And us? What do we say about us?" "That we're private, that it's real, that it has no bearing on how either of us does our jobs." She met his eyes. "I'm not going to lie. If someone asks me directly, I'm not going to lie, but I'm also not making a company-wide announcement about my personal life." "That's fair? Is it fair to you?" He thought about it honestly. "Yeah, it is." She nodded once, something in her shoulders released slightly. "I hate this part of it," she said. "I built this company so I could control the quality of everything inside it. I hate that I can't control what people assume." "Nobody can control what people assume." "I know." A beat. "I know." He stood up. "The meeting. Sooner is better. This afternoon, 3 o'clock. He moved toward the door. "Ethan." He turned. She was looking at him with the unguarded expression, the one she didn't always manage to contain. "Thank you for telling me right away." "We said we'd be honest," he said. "That includes the uncomfortable things." She nodded. He left. The 3 o'clock meeting was 17 minutes long. Charlotte stood at the front of the main conference room and spoke in the way she spoke when she had decided exactly what she was going to say and was not going to be deflected from it. She did not address the rumor by name. She addressed the company's values, merit, accountability, quality, and she did it with a directness that acknowledged, without stating, that there was a reason she was covering this ground today. Everyone in this room earned their place here, she said. That's not a thing I say to be motivating. It's a statement of fact that I take personally. When we win accounts, we win them because of the work. That standard doesn't change and it doesn't have exceptions, and I want everyone in this company to hold me to that. She made eye contact with the room. Not with Ethan specifically. She was deliberate about that, and he noticed it. But with everyone, in the way she had when she meant what she was saying and needed people to receive it clearly. If anyone has a concern about how work is assigned or evaluated here, my door is open. That's not a formality. It's an open door. And that was largely the extent of it. No drama, no speech about private lives or personnel matters, just Charlotte Hayes standing in front of her team and reminding them of what the ground rules were, in a tone that made it clear she had built this company on those rules and was not interested in renegotiating them. The room dispersed. A few people looked at Ethan as they filtered out, not accusatorially, more with the expression of people recalibrating, running the data through again. Priya stopped next to his chair before she left. For what it's worth, she said quietly, I've worked with you for 18 months, and I've never once seen you do anything on this team that wasn't exactly what it looked like. Thanks, he said. She's good, Priya said, meaning Charlotte. Just that. And then she was gone. Bang. The meeting with the client came 2 weeks later. It was Ethan's idea. He proposed it to Charlotte one evening, and she looked at him for a long moment before saying, You want to walk Daniel through the entire process? Yes. He already approved the work. I know, but I want there to be a record, documented, detailed, of every decision in the Meridian project. Not because I have anything to hide, because I want it on file. Charlotte looked at him steadily. You shouldn't have to do this. I know I shouldn't have to. I'm doing it anyway. He paused. I want the work to be unambiguous, for the company, for you. She opened her mouth and then closed it. Then she said, I'll set up the call. The call was on a Wednesday afternoon, and Daniel from Meridian was, as Ethan had assessed, a person who responded to substance. Ethan walked through the project from the beginning. The initial brief, the 3 rounds of design development, the specific reasoning behind every major decision. He talked about color theory and hierarchy and the particular communication challenge the client had articulated at the first meeting. Daniel asked sharp questions and Ethan answered them, and by the end of the 40-minute call, the client said, This is the kind of documentation I wish more agencies provided. And Charlotte, who had been on the call and largely silent, said, It's the standard we hold ourselves to. After the call ended, she sat in her office for a moment before messaging him. Well done. He responded, Now it's on the record. Her reply, You didn't have to do that for me. He sat with it for a second and then wrote back, I did it for both of us. Chad. June came in warm, and with it came the question that Ethan had been carrying for 2 months like a stone in his pocket. He and Charlotte had been together, if together was the word, and he decided it was, for approximately 4 months of the official version and considerably longer of the unofficial version. They had not pretended to be friends. They had not performed distance. They were private in the way that they'd agreed to be, which meant the people who were paying attention knew, and the people who weren't didn't. And Charlotte had been right that Marcus had always looked like he knew something. They'd had dinner with Marcus and his wife once in May, and Marcus had been exactly himself, warm, perceptive, not making it into a thing, and his wife Denise had, by the end of the evening, started talking to Charlotte about a home renovation project, as if they'd known each other for 2 years, which Ethan found both amusing and quietly telling. The stone in his pocket was Mia. He had told himself in January that he would know when it was right. He had set the standard, when I'm certain she's not going anywhere. And he had meant it, and he had held it. And now, sitting in early June with the clear-eyed honesty that he tried to bring to most important questions, he admitted to himself that the bar had been cleared. Charlotte had not gone anywhere. Charlotte had been present in all the ways that mattered. The real ones, not the gesture ones. She had sat at his kitchen table in April and asked him to tell her about Mia, and she had listened for an hour and a half, asking specific questions, remembering details, and she had never once said anything that sounded like someone managing a complicated situation. She had sounded like someone who wanted to know. He still didn't tell her right away. He sat with it for a week, the way he sat with important things, turning it over and checking it from different angles. He talked to no one about it. He went through his routine: work, Mia's school drop-offs and pickups, the apartment, the carefully maintained ordinary structure of his days. And he thought about his daughter and the world he'd built around her, and what it would mean to introduce a new element into it, and whether the person he was considering introducing was someone Mia's world could hold. He decided yes, not quickly, not easily, but with the solid, grounded quality of a decision that was resting on real evidence rather than hope. He told Charlotte on a Friday evening in the second week of June. They were at her place, saying she had an apartment in a neighborhood 20 minutes from his, the apartment of a person who had invested heavily in exactly one room, which was the second bedroom she'd converted to an office, and had largely accepted the rest of it as something that existed around that central fact. They'd gotten takeout from the Thai place she'd introduced him to, which was better than the one near his apartment, which he hadn't told her because she'd been visibly pleased about the discovery. They were on her couch. She was reading something on her laptop, which she frequently did in the evenings, and he was not reading anything, just present, which was a thing he'd been gradually learning how to be more comfortable with. The ordinary shared silence of two people who didn't need to be performing at each other. "I want you to meet Mia," he said. Charlotte looked up from her laptop. "Not yet. Not this week." He kept his voice even. "I want to plan it. I want to do it in a context where she's comfortable and not overwhelmed. Somewhere low-key. I don't want it to be positioned as a big event because she'll build it up and then be managing her own expectations, which she's 6 and shouldn't have to do." Charlotte closed the laptop. She turned to face him with the full attention she brought to things that mattered. "Okay," she said. "I want to talk to her first, not about you specifically, not about us, just about the idea that I have a friend who I'd like her to meet someday. I want to introduce the idea gently. Whatever you think is right. I mean that, Ethan. You know her. I don't." "You're nervous," he said. She looked at him. "A little, yes." "About what?" She took a second. Charlotte always took a second when she was going to say something true instead of something safe. "About her not liking me. About getting it wrong." A pause. "About, I know what she's been through, what you've both been through, and I'm aware that I am the variable being introduced into a thing that has its own shape, its own history. You're not replacing anything," he said. "I want you to know that. That's not what this is. Mia has a mother, and that story is hers, and it's real, and it will always be part of her life. I'm not asking you to be something you can't be." "What are you asking?" He looked at her. "I'm asking you to just be yourself. Honestly, don't perform anything for her. Kids see through performance before adults do. What if who I am is a 30-year-old woman who runs a company and can't cook and doesn't actually know how to talk to children? Then she'll probably like you for exactly that." Charlotte looked uncertain. He found it paradoxically reassuring. The uncertainty was real, which meant the investment was real. "She's obsessed with the ocean," he said. "You have approximately 10,000 opinions about marine ecosystems. I think you'll be fine." She made a sound that wasn't quite a laugh. "That's not a strategy." "I know, but it's a start." He talked to Mia the following Saturday morning. Mia was eating cereal at the kitchen table with the focused seriousness she brought to cereal, which was the same focused seriousness she brought to most things, because she was that kind of person. Ethan sat across from her with his coffee and waited for her to finish the first bowl, because she was difficult to reach during the first bowl. "I want to tell you something," he said, when she'd set the spoon down. Mia looked at him with her direct brown eyes. She had Kara's eyes. He'd gotten used to that. It had taken time, but he'd gotten there. "Is it good or bad?" "Good, or just neutral, just information." "Okay." She pulled her cereal bowl closer, because there was more. "I have a friend. Her name is Charlotte. She's someone I work with, and she's someone I've gotten to know, and I really like her." Mia processed this. "A girlfriend?" He was careful here. "A good friend who is a woman, yes." "Miss, when is your friend?" Mia said, referencing the neighbor with the practical logic of a 6-year-old who was testing categories. Yes, she is. This is a different kind of friend. Mia considered this with the patience of a scientist evaluating a new data set. Does she like animals? I think so. I'll ask her. Does she have any? Not that I know of. I'll find out. Okay. She went back to her cereal, apparently satisfied that the relevant criteria had been established. He watched her eat and thought, this is the most important thing. Not the conversation with Charlotte about feelings, not the careful management of professional complications. This small person eating cereal and evaluating his friends by whether they liked animals. 2 weeks later, on a Saturday in late June, he took Mia to the park. It was a familiar park, 3 blocks from the apartment, the one with the good climbing structure and the small pond that had ducks, which Mia had opinions about. They went most weekends in good weather. Ethan had chosen it deliberately. Comfortable ground for Mia, no pressure, no special occasion. Charlotte met them there. She was standing near the pond when they arrived, and she looked like exactly what she was. A person who had gotten there 10 minutes early and spent the intervening time thinking too hard about how she was standing. She was wearing a jacket that was slightly too formal for a Saturday park, and she was holding her phone and not looking at it, which meant she'd been trying to look like she wasn't waiting. Mia saw her before Ethan said anything. Is that her? Mia said. That's her. Mia looked at Charlotte with the direct assessing quality that she brought to new things. Charlotte had spotted them and was walking over, and Ethan watched her face go through a microsequence, the professional composure, the attempt to modulate it, and then, as she got closer, something simpler, something without strategy in it. Hi, Charlotte said. She crouched down so she was at Mia's level, which Ethan noted was either instinctive or very well researched, and looked at her directly. You must be Mia. Your dad talks about you all the time. Mia looked at Charlotte with complete seriousness. Do you like animals? She said. Charlotte blinked once. Yes, especially ocean animals. This was apparently the correct answer. Mia's expression reconfigured. Not into warmth exactly, not yet, but into the category of things that were worth evaluating further. There are ducks, Mia said, and pointed at the pond. They're not ocean animals, but they're still good. Ducks are very underrated, Charlotte said, still crouching. Nobody talks about how good ducks are. Mia considered this gravely. I know, she said, and then turned and walked toward the pond, apparently having decided that the preliminary interview was complete. Ethan looked at Charlotte, who stood back up. She was slightly flushed, not from the walk. Ducks are underrated, he said. I panicked, and it came out, she said quietly. I don't know if I actually believe it. I think you might. She let out a breath. She watched Mia, who was now standing at the edge of the pond making authoritative observations to the ducks. She looks exactly like you described. Yeah. She's very serious. Always. She was born with the expression of someone who has considered the matter thoroughly. Charlotte smiled. Not the managed version, the real one, the one that reached the corners of her eyes. She watched Mia for another moment, and her expression had the quality of a person who is in contact with something real and hasn't prepared a response to it. Ethan said nothing. He let the moment exist. They spent 2.5 hours at the park. Mia led Charlotte through an extensive duck-related commentary and then shifted, without transition, to a detailed explanation of what she knew about starfish, which was considerable because she had been through the ocean documentary twice and had retained approximately 90% of it. Charlotte listened with full attention and asked follow-up questions that were genuine, not performative. At one point, she told Mia something she actually knew about bioluminescence, and Mia looked at her with an expression of pure, startled respect that she usually reserved for Mrs. Nguyen and her first-grade teacher. You know a lot about the ocean, Mia said, not as flattery, as a statement of documented fact. I think about it sometimes, Charlotte said. When I was younger, I thought I might study it. Why didn't you? A beat. I studied something else instead. What? Business. Mia processed this. Is that good? Charlotte glanced at Ethan, then back at Mia. Some days. Other days, I think the ocean might have been better. Mia nodded like this was the wisest thing she'd heard all week. On the walk back from the pond, Mia took Ethan's hand automatically, the way she always did, and for a few steps she also reached sideways toward Charlotte. not quite reaching her hand, just moving in that direction, and then seemed to think better of it and pulled her arm back and looked at the path. Charlotte had seen it. Ethan had seen her see it. He watched Charlotte look at the small arm that had reached and reconsidered, and he watched her face do something that was complicated and quiet and not ready for public display, and he thought, yes, this is right. This is where this was always going. On the drive home, Mia was quiet for the first several minutes, which was unusual. She looked out the window with the expression she used when she was working through something. "Dad?" she said eventually. "Yeah, Bug." Charlotte knows a lot about starfish, too. "I know." She said they can grow their arms back. A pause. "I didn't know that." "It's true," he said. "If they lose one, they can regenerate it." Mia looked out the window again. "That's good," she said, with a satisfaction that seemed to go somewhere beyond the specific biological fact. "That's really good." He drove the rest of the way home with the quiet certainty of a man watching something fall into place. Not dramatically, not with fanfare, just with the solid, irreversible quality of something real finding its shape. When he got home, he texted Charlotte. "She mentioned you 3 times before we got inside." Charlotte's response took 5 minutes, which for her was an eternity, and when it came, it said, "I thought about the duck thing the whole drive home. I do think ducks are underrated. I think I actually believe it." He sat on the couch and read it and felt, for the first time in longer than he could accurately measure, like the future was a place he wanted to get to. The summer settled into something that Ethan had not let himself expect. A kind of ordinary that had real weight to it, the kind you didn't notice you were missing until it was there. Mia and Charlotte saw each other roughly twice a month through July. Not every week. Ethan was deliberate about the pacing, the same way he was deliberate about most things that mattered, but enough that the strangeness of the situation wore away at its edges and something more natural grew in. They went back to the park twice. Once they went to the aquarium, which had been Mia's suggestion delivered with the transparent strategy of a 6-year-old who knew what she wanted and was selecting the most persuasive argument for it. Namely, that Charlotte knew about ocean things and should therefore be present at an ocean things location. Charlotte had arrived at the aquarium with the expression of someone who had done research, which Ethan suspected she had, and spent 40 minutes in front of the jellyfish tank with Mia in what appeared to be a deeply serious bilateral examination of the species. By the time they reached the shark tunnel, Mia was walking next to Charlotte as a default rather than routing everything through her father, which was not a small thing. Ethan watched these developments the way he watched most things that were important to him, quietly, without narrating them, making sure his own reaction wasn't distorting what he was actually seeing. What he was actually seeing was his daughter slowly, on her own terms, making space in her world for a new person. Not replacing anything, just expanding. Kids were better at that than adults sometimes, when you gave them the room and didn't push the timeline. Charlotte was not smooth about it. She remained, characteristically, slightly too prepared and occasionally miscalibrated in the way of a person who was operating outside their most practiced territory. She once brought Mia a book about deep-sea creatures that was written for readers approximately 6 years older than Mia, and when Ethan quietly pointed this out afterward, she had looked at the age recommendation on the back cover with the expression of someone who had made a calculation error on a presentation and was noting it for correction. She'd gone back the following week with the same book's companion volume for younger readers, and Mia had accepted it with the specific satisfaction of a child who recognizes that an adult has paid attention. These were the things that told Ethan what he needed to know. Not the grand gestures, Charlotte didn't traffic in those anyway, but the corrections. The showing up with the right book because she'd gone back and figured out what the right book was. The way she looked at Mia when Mia wasn't looking at her, with a mixture of careful attention and something that was quietly, privately tender. August arrived, and with it, the phone call that changed everything. Charlotte took it on a Wednesday morning in her office, and Ethan didn't know about it until that evening. She called him at 7:30, which was later than she usually called, and her voice had the particular flatness of a person who has been processing something for hours and has not fully resolved it. "Are you free tonight?" she said. "Mia's in bed by 8:30. After that, yeah. What's wrong?" "Nothing's wrong." A pause. "Can you come over?" He got to her apartment at 9. She was sitting at her kitchen table, not the office converted room, the actual kitchen, with a glass of water she hadn't touched, and her laptop open to an email that she turned toward him when he sat down. He read it. It was from a company called Meridian West Group, not the Meridian account he'd worked on, a different organization entirely, a large West Coast investment and media firm based in San Francisco. They were expanding into content marketing and brand development. They had been watching Hayes Creative for 18 months. They wanted to offer Charlotte the opportunity to open and operate a Hayes Creative Pacific office with substantial financial backing, operational autonomy, and the kind of platform that, as Ethan read the email, was obviously significant. Not just a branch office, a full West Coast operation with real infrastructure and real backing, and the implied trajectory of a company that was ready to move from regional player to national one. He read it twice. He set the laptop down. "When did this come in?" he said. "Tuesday morning. I've been sitting on it for 36 hours. "Why didn't you?" "Because I needed to think before I talked to you about it. I needed to know what I actually felt about it before I brought it to you." He looked at her. She was sitting with her hands around the water glass, and her expression had the quality it got when she was doing the thing she'd described to him months ago, running the problem, all sides, building toward a decision that was going to be real and not just reactive. "What do you actually feel about it?" he said. "Professionally?" She took a breath. "It's the most significant opportunity I've had since I founded the company. San Francisco, real backing, the scale we'd be operating at." She stopped. "It would change what Hayes Creative is, what it could become." "And personally?" She looked at him directly. "Personally, the answer is somewhere in this apartment, and I'm terrified of what asking the question means." He was quiet for a moment. "Tell me about the offer." "All of it." She walked him through it, the financial terms, the timeline, the operational structure. He listened without interrupting, which was something he'd gotten better at with her because she thought through problems out loud and needed the space to complete the circuit before she could receive anything back. The offer was real. It was serious. It was the kind of thing that didn't come twice. When she finished, he sat with it for a moment. "The company stays yours," he said. "Full ownership. They're silent partners providing capital and client access. My operation, my brand, my people." "Your people," he said. "What happens to the New York team?" She'd thought about this. Senior staff would have the option to relocate. The New York office would continue, scaled back initially, but I'd keep it running. It's not a closure, it's an expansion. He nodded slowly. "I want to go," she said, and her voice was careful and honest and a little raw. "I want to take it, but I won't make that decision the way I made decisions before. On just the professional calculus. Because of us. Because of you and Mia," she said. "Both of you, and I'm not saying that as pressure. I'm saying it because it's true, and you deserve to hear it stated plainly." He looked at the table. He looked at his hands. He thought about Mia's school, the first-grade teacher she adored, the friends she'd made. Mrs. Nguyen downstairs with the warm milk and the 2 chapters and the inflexible bedtime. He thought about his sister Joanne, 20 minutes away, who had become in the last 3 years one of the primary structural supports of his life. He thought about the apartment with the fish drawing on the refrigerator and the constellation nightlight, and everything that the word stable had meant to him after the years it hadn't been. "I can't answer this tonight," he said. "I know. I'm not asking you to. How long do you have?" "They want a decision by the end of September." That was 6 weeks. He stood up from the table. Charlotte looked up at him, and for a second she looked uncertain in a way that he didn't often see. The CEO armor fully absent, just a woman at a kitchen table who had brought something real to a person she cared about and was waiting to find out what it cost. He put his hand on the side of her face, briefly. She leaned into it slightly, the way she did when she was allowing herself to receive something instead of managing it. "This isn't you choosing between the company and us," he said. "Don't frame it that way. That's not the question." "What's the question?" "The question is what the next version of our lives looks like, and I need some time to think about what I can honestly bring to that question." He lowered his hand. "Give me a week." She nodded. "Okay, And Charlotte. He waited until she was looking at him. I want you to know the professional part of this. Take it seriously. Don't minimize it because you're trying to make things easier for me. That opportunity is real and you've earned it, and I want you to be honest about what you want. She looked at him for a long moment. I always wanted someone who could say that and mean it, she said quietly. I mean it. He went home. Oh, the week was the hardest thinking he'd done in years. Not because the answer was unclear, it became less unclear as the days passed, but because the process was genuinely costly. He had to hold real things against each other. Mia's stability, which he had spent 3 years constructing with the careful attention of a person who understood what instability cost a child. His own career, which was portable in a way that a graphic designer's career was portable if the designer was good and willing to rebuild relationships. His sister, who was not replaceable. Mrs. Nguyen, who was not replaceable. The apartment, the school, the first-grade teacher, the park with the ducks. And on the other side, Charlotte. The fact of Charlotte, which was not a small fact. The company she was building and what it meant that she'd asked him to be part of where it was going. Mia's face at the aquarium, walking next to Charlotte as a default, the starfish and the regenerating arms. On Thursday of that week, he called Joanne. She listened to the whole thing without interrupting, which was unusual for her and meant she understood the weight of it. When he finished, there was a silence. What does your gut say? She said. My gut and my fear are having a disagreement. What's the fear? Uprooting Mia. Starting over somewhere we don't know anyone. Taking a chance on something when the stable thing is right here. And your gut? He looked at his kitchen, at the refrigerator, at the fish drawing. That the stable thing I built here was a response to losing everything, and it was the right response for that time, but I'm not in that time anymore. A pause. And Mia isn't either, maybe. Joanne was quiet for a moment. She likes Charlotte? More every time. On her own terms, not because I'm pushing it. Have you talked to Mia? Not about this specifically. Maybe you should. He sat with that for the rest of Thursday. On Friday after school, he and Mia had what they called their walking conversation, which was a thing they did on days when something was on the table. They walked to the corner and back, sometimes twice, and talked, and the walking made it easier than sitting face to face. Mia had been doing this since she was 4, apparently instinctively, and Ethan had learned to use the format for anything that needed honest ground. They went out at 4:30, the end of daylight going gold and long-shadowed, and Mia walked with the focused stride of a person who had been at school all day and needed movement. I want to tell you something, Ethan said, and I want to hear what you think, for real. Mia looked at him. Okay. Charlotte has a chance to open a new part of her company. In California, San Francisco. He kept his voice even, factual. It's a big opportunity for her. Mia processed this. Is she going to go? She's deciding. A few steps. Would we go? There it was. He should have known Mia would cut to the center of it. She always had. That's what I'm trying to figure out, he said honestly. It would mean moving, new school, new apartment, new city. You'd be farther from Aunt Joanne. You'd leave your friends here. Mia was quiet for a full block. She did not rush her own thinking, never had. He let her have it. Emma from school moved to Portland, Mia said. I know. She sends me pictures sometimes. A pause. She said it rains a lot, but she found a good park. Yeah. Another half block. Dad? Yeah, bug. She looked up at him with the serious brown eyes that still sometimes took his breath away with how much they looked like Kara's and how completely they looked like their own thing simultaneously. Are you happy? The question landed like something physical. He looked at his daughter and thought about Charlotte in the November months, the careful professional distance, the kitchen, the museum, the March sidewalk, the eggs, the sandwich at 7:30, the phone call 8 days ago, and the face of a woman at a kitchen table who had been honest about what mattered to her. Yes, he said, I am. The most happy, or like, she searched for the word. Part way happy? Real happy, he said, the kind that takes a while to build. Mia nodded, turning this over. Charlotte makes you real happy? She's a big part of it. They walked the full second block and turned back, and Mia was quiet the whole way, doing the thing where she thought hard and didn't perform the thinking. When they got back to the front of the building, she stopped on the sidewalk and looked up at him with an expression that was, in that moment, too old for her face and entirely hers. I think you should go, she said. If it's the real happy. She said it simply, with the clarity of a person who had thought it through and wasn't saying it to please anyone. I'll make a new park friend. A pause, practical, 6 years old. Can we bring Mrs. Nguyen? He laughed. A real one, sudden. Mrs. Nguyen has her own life, Bug. We could ask. We could ask, he agreed. He took her inside and he sat on the couch after she went to wash up for dinner, and he thought about what it cost a child to say, I think you should go, because she had read her father's face correctly and was choosing his happiness with the clean, uncomplicating love of someone who loved him without condition. He sat with the weight of that for a while, letting it be what it was. Then he picked up his phone and called Charlotte. She answered on the second ring. Have you made a decision? She said. She had not been casual about her waiting. He respected that she didn't pretend. Yeah. A pause. He could hear her breathing adjust. I want to talk about what it actually looks like, he said. Not a theoretical yes, a practical conversation, because if we're doing this, we're doing it the right way. Okay. Her voice was controlled and careful and entirely unable to conceal the thing underneath it. Okay, yes, practical conversation. I need to find work in San Francisco. That's not impossible for what I do, but it's not overnight. I'd need a few months, potentially. Is that timeline compatible? The target is a March opening for the new office. I'd be moving around the new year, January at the latest. She paused. You could work remote for a transition period. I have contacts in the SF design community. She stopped herself. I'm trying not to solve it for you. I know. I appreciate the self-restraint. It's a lot of effort. I can see that. He settled back on the couch. Mia's school situation. I need to research options there before we commit. That's a non-negotiable for me. Of course, completely. I'll send you everything I know about the neighborhoods I've been looking at. She wants to know if we can bring Mrs. Nguyen. A beat. Then, Mrs. Nguyen from downstairs? Yes. He heard Charlotte make the sound she made when something hit her in a place she hadn't fully armored. A brief, almost inaudible thing. She said that? Verbatim. She also said she'll make a new park friend. A longer pause. When Charlotte spoke again, her voice had the not quite steady quality that she only allowed in the very honest moments. She's remarkable, Ethan. I know. How did she get like that? I have no idea. She arrived with most of it. Charlotte stopped. What? I want to be worth it. What she said. I want to earn it. You keep saying that, he said. Earn it. Because I mean it every time. He looked at the refrigerator from across the room, the fish drawing, and the 3 stick figures with the large briefcase. We're coming, he said. The silence on the other end of the line was a specific kind, the kind that comes after a person has been holding their breath without knowing it, and has finally been given permission to stop. Okay, Charlotte said, and her voice was quiet and entirely real. Okay. But I need something from you. Anything. When things get hard, and they will, because this is a big move and big moves have hard parts, I need you to not go into problem-solving isolation. I need you to actually tell me when it's difficult. She was quiet for a second. I'll try. That's all I'm asking. Try. I'm better at it than I was in January, she said, and there was something wry and true in it. You are, he said. I've noticed. The next 6 weeks were the kind of busy that had its own momentum. Ethan told Joanne in person, on a Sunday, and she sat with it for a moment before saying, San Francisco's a good city. in the measured tone of someone who was keeping their reaction assembled for her brother's benefit. Then she said, "I'm going to visit a lot." And he said, "I'm counting on it." And she looked at the table and said, "She better be worth it." And he said, "She is." And Joanne looked up at him with the older sister expression she'd been deploying his entire life and said, "Then go." And that was that. He researched schools. He found 3 in the neighborhood Charlotte had identified that had strong programs and the kind of learning environments where Mia's particular brand of serious, curious, build-my-own-interior-world intelligence would have room to move. He sent the information to Charlotte, and she sent back annotated notes within 3 hours, which he was not surprised by. He updated his portfolio. He reached out to 2 designers he'd connected with at a conference 2 years ago who were working in San Francisco, low-key, just getting the lay of the land. Both responded warmly. One mentioned an agency that was hiring senior designers with exactly his background. He told Mrs. Nguyen on a Tuesday evening in the hallway, and she looked at him for a moment and then said, in the direct way she had of saying things, "That woman, Charlotte, she is good for you." He hadn't realized Mrs. Nguyen had noticed. Mrs. Nguyen had noticed everything. "You have been carrying," she said, gesturing in a way that meant his whole life, not just the shopping or the childcare, for too long alone. It's okay to put some down. Then she pulled him into a hug that lasted longer than expected and smelled like the kitchen she'd been cooking in, and she told him she expected video calls, and she expected to see Mia on them, and she was not flexible on this point. Mia, for her part, approached the whole enterprise with the particular equanimity of a child who had been told once clearly and honestly what was happening and had decided to trust the person telling her. She asked questions that were specific and practical. Would her new room have a window? Could she bring all her ocean drawings? Was California near the actual ocean? When Ethan confirmed that San Francisco was very near the actual ocean, she made the expression she made when a crucial data point had been confirmed and asked no further questions about the move for 3 days. In September, Charlotte came to the apartment for the first time. She'd been to his neighborhood. They'd met near it a few times, but not to the apartment itself. He'd been aware of this as a deliberate threshold without fully naming it until he invited her over for dinner, a Sunday, in early September, just the 3 of them. Mia had spent Saturday helping Ethan clean, which meant she had been in charge of the living room and had done an extremely thorough job of organizing her own things into neat stacks that she then explained to Charlotte the following day with the detailed pride of a curator. Charlotte had listened to the complete taxonomy of Mia's current drawing collection and the status of 3 separate in-progress ocean projects with the focused attention she brought to client briefings, which was the highest compliment Ethan could privately assign. Dinner was pasta, because pasta was reliable, and Mia had a strong preference for the version Ethan made with the butter and parmesan that she called the real one, to distinguish it from the tomato versions. Charlotte had contributed a very good loaf of bread from a bakery near her apartment, which she had apparently spent considerable thought on, because she arrived with both a sourdough and a whole wheat, because she hadn't been sure which Mia would prefer, and when Mia picked the sourdough and Charlotte said, "Good choice," with the tone of a person confirming correct taste, Mia looked at her with the expression she reserved for people whose judgment she had decided to respect. After dinner, Mia asked Charlotte to help with the in-progress jellyfish drawing. Charlotte sat at the kitchen table with colored pencils and a 6-year-old explaining jellyfish anatomy with the authority of a marine biologist, and Ethan stood at the sink doing the dishes and not looking at them more than he needed to, giving the moment its space. "The tentacles go longer," Mia said. "Longer like this?" "More longer. And wavier. They're in the water." "Right, they'd be moving." "Exactly." The satisfaction in Mia's voice was pure. Ethan looked out the window above the sink at the September evening, at the street going about its ordinary business below, and he thought about what Joanne had said back in February. That's a good standard, don't lower it. And he thought about Charlotte Hayes in January, standing in a doorway saying, "I have feelings here too," in the stiffest, most over-rehearsed sentence she'd ever delivered to another human being. And here she was, 7 months later, at his kitchen table making a jellyfish's tentacles wavier at the instruction of a 6-year-old who had evaluated her on the metric of animal appreciation and marine biology knowledge and found her to be a person of value. "Better?" Charlotte said. "Much better. Mia said gravely. You're good at jellyfish. I've never drawn a jellyfish before in my life. You're a natural, Mia said with complete seriousness, and Charlotte's laugh, the real one, the brief, unguarded one, filled the kitchen, and Ethan kept looking out the window because he needed a moment that was just his. When Mia went to bed, Ethan sat on the couch and Charlotte sat beside him, close enough that their shoulders were touching, and they were quiet for a while in the way they were sometimes quiet. Not empty, just real. She showed me her room, Charlotte said. I know, I saw her take you. She has a solar system poster. She does. She told me the names of all the moons of Jupiter. A pause. I only knew 3. She'll appreciate that you knew 3. Most people know 0. Charlotte was quiet for a moment. She asked me if I was going to live in California with you. Ethan looked at her. What did you tell her? I said I was going to live there and I hoped we would all be neighbors. A beat. She said, neighbors means you're really close. I said yes. She thought about it and said, okay, but you have to know where the good parks are. He laughed. That's fair. I told her I would find the best one. And? Charlotte smiled. The real version, still slightly new in his presence even after everything. She said she'd be the judge of that. He took her hand and she led him, and they sat in the ordinary September evening of a small apartment with a sleeping child down the hall and the future laid out ahead of them, uncertain in its details and clear in its direction. And neither of them needed to say anything more about it. The fish drawing was still on the refrigerator. The 3 stick figures with the 2 large briefcase. The sun that Mia had drawn above the house. Tomorrow there was packing to think about, and schools to finalize, and a lease to end, and 1,000 practical things that were the actual texture of change. Tonight there was this. It was enough. They arrived in San Francisco on a Friday in January, in the rain. Not a dramatic rain, not the kind that announces itself as significant. Just the steady, indifferent drizzle that the city apparently offered as a standard welcome package. The kind that made the streets shine and turned every streetlight into a smear of gold on the wet pavement. Ethan drove the rental van with Mia in the passenger seat because she had claimed it on the grounds that she was the navigator, a role she had appointed herself to somewhere in Nevada and taken with complete seriousness despite the GPS doing most of the actual work. Charlotte had flown out 3 weeks earlier to manage the office setup. She'd found them an apartment in the Sunset District, 2 bedrooms, a 3rd-floor walk-up with a bay window in the living room, and a view of a street lined with the kind of narrow Victorian houses that Mia had called the painted ones the first time she'd seen photos. It was not a perfect apartment. The heating was inconsistent. The 2nd bedroom was smaller than the one Mia had left behind, and the kitchen drawers stuck in the cold. It was a real apartment in a real city that was not yet home. Charlotte was waiting at the building when they pulled up. She was standing under the narrow overhang of the entrance, holding 2 coffees and looking like a person who had been there long enough that the rain had found the parts of her jacket that weren't quite waterproof. Mia spotted her before Ethan finished parking and was out of the van before he'd fully stopped, which required a brief but firm conversation about traffic that Mia received with the impatience of a 7-year-old who had been in a vehicle for the better part of 2 days and had identified her objective. He watched from the van as Mia reached Charlotte on the sidewalk. Charlotte crouched down. She still did this, still came down to Mia's level without making it a production, and said something he couldn't hear, and Mia said something back, and Charlotte laughed, and Mia took her hand and turned toward the building with the air of a person ready to assess the premises. Ethan sat in the parked van for 1 moment, alone, watching his daughter pull Charlotte Hayes toward the door of a building in a city he didn't yet know, and he thought, this is it. Not the beginning of the good part. The actual good part. Then he got out and hauled boxes in the rain, because that was also the actual good part. The lifting and the stuck drawers, and the heating that needed to be figured out, and the city that was not yet home, but was going to be. The first month was harder than he'd let himself fully anticipate, which was its own lesson. He'd known, intellectually, that starting over had friction. He'd done it before. After the accident, he'd effectively rebuilt his entire life from the inside out, so he understood that transitions had costs, and that the costs were real, and not a sign that you'd made the wrong decision. But knowing a thing and living it were, as always, different. The job he'd been in contact with before the move came through, but the start date pushed to mid-February, which left him with 3 weeks of being in a new city with more time than he was accustomed to, and the particular displacement of a person who has removed themselves from every familiar context simultaneously. He walked Mia to her new school every morning. Millbrook Elementary, 14 blocks from the apartment, a good school that he'd researched thoroughly, and that Mia had assessed on the first day with the expression of a scientist beginning a new field study. He came back and worked on freelance projects and oriented himself slowly, neighborhood by neighborhood, the way you oriented yourself in a place that didn't yet have your history in it. Mia had 2 hard weeks. She didn't say much about it directly, she wasn't that kind of kid, but she was quieter at dinner than usual and asked about Mrs. Nguyen more than she had in the weeks before the move. And once, on a Tuesday night, she came out of her room at 9:30 and sat on the couch next to Ethan and didn't ask for anything, just sat there, and he put his arm around her and they watched something benign on television and he let her stay up until she fell asleep against his shoulder. He carried her to bed and stood in her doorway for a while in the dark. He thought about all the things he'd built and maintained and protected since she was 3 years old. The routines, the stability, the constellation nightlight that was now in her new room, casting the same slow patterns on a different ceiling. He thought about the question she'd asked him on their walking conversation. The most happy, or partway happy. He thought about what it cost a child to trust a parent's judgment about happiness when she was the one who had to absorb the change. He went back to the living room and sat for a while. And he didn't call Charlotte that night because it was late and she was deep in the sprint of opening the Pacific office, and he knew the shape of her days right now, the relentless practical weight of it. But he texted her. Mia had a quiet night. I think she's adjusting. It just takes what it takes. Charlotte's response came 20 minutes later than he'd expected, which meant she'd been in something. Is she okay? She will be. She's tougher than either of us. A pause. Then, I know. I just want to help, and I don't always know what that looks like. He looked at the message for a moment. He typed back, You're already helping. You're here. And Charlotte Hayes, who had been carefully, painstakingly learning all year how to receive things instead of just managing them, sent back a single line. I'm not going anywhere. He read it and believed it completely, which was its own kind of landmark. February arrived and Mia found her footing in the specific, unmistakable way that kids found footing, not through any single event but through the gradual accumulation of small anchors. A girl named Priscilla, who sat 2 rows over in class and shared Mia's opinion that sharks were more interesting than dolphins, which was apparently a controversial position in 2nd grade. A park 4 blocks from the apartment that had a climbing structure with a view of the water on clear days. A Saturday routine that Ethan established early and held to, farmer's market in the morning, lunch at home, afternoons open, that gave the week a shape she could count on. Charlotte found her footing differently, in the way that adults find footing in a new city when they are simultaneously building something large and professional in it, through exhaustion, mostly, and the particular clarity that exhaustion sometimes produces. The Pacific office opened in the 2nd week of February, 3 weeks behind the target date, because construction on the space had run over and the contractor had delivered news with a cheerful consistency that Charlotte had described to Ethan once in a voice that suggested she was managing her response very carefully as a learning experience in West Coast timeline culture. The opening was not a party. Charlotte had considered a soft launch event and decided against it. Too much performance, too little substance, and she'd never been the kind of person who celebrated things before they'd actually proven themselves. She opened the doors, she brought in the first 2 clients she'd signed in California, and she worked. That was how she marked things. Ethan had come to the office on the first morning, not because Charlotte asked him to, she hadn't, but because it seemed like the thing to do. He'd brought coffee from the place they'd found 3 blocks away, good coffee, which Charlotte had located within the first week of arriving the way she always located good coffee, with the focused efficiency of a woman who had decided this was a problem worth solving early. He'd sat on the edge of her desk in the new office, smaller than the New York one and still smelling of fresh paint, and she'd looked up from her laptop and said, "You didn't have to come." And he'd said, "I know." and she'd looked at the coffee and back at him with the expression she had when she was accepting something and allowing herself to, and said, "Thank you." "How does it feel?" he said. She looked around the office, the clean surfaces, the view out the window of a San Francisco street going about its morning, the logo on the glass partition that she'd approved 3 weeks ago. "Like the beginning of something," she said. "Not like arrival. Like standing at the start of a long road and seeing it's real. That's the right feeling for this. It's uncomfortable. Most right things are at the start." She looked at him. "I've been thinking about what you said in New York, before we left, that the stable thing I'd built was a response to what I lost. And maybe I was past the time when that was the response I needed." She paused. "I think about that a lot out here, the first few weeks especially." "Yeah?" "I built the company as the thing I could control, and it was real. It is real. It's genuinely what I wanted, but I think some of it was also just fortress building." She said it matter-of-factly, without the performance of self-insight, just as an honest observation about herself that she'd arrived at, and was stating because they were the kind of people who stated things. "Out here, everything is new. I don't have the history in the walls, and it's uncomfortable, and I don't like it. And I also think I think it might be good for me." He looked at her for a long moment. "You're different out here," he said. "Different how?" "A little less held together, in a good way." She made the sound that meant she was processing whether a thing was a compliment before accepting it. "Less armored," she said. "Yeah. I'm working on it. A beat. It helps that you're here. You'd have figured it out without me." "Maybe," she said, "but it would have taken longer and I would have been meaner to the contractor." Chas. Spring came to San Francisco in a way that Ethan hadn't expected. Not a dramatic seasonal shift, but a gradual lightening, the drizzle easing off and the light going longer and the neighborhood becoming more itself as the weeks accumulated. He learned the city slowly, the way he'd learned Charlotte, not by studying it, but by being in it, accumulating specific knowledge through specific experience. He knew which bakery opened earliest and what to order there. He knew the park Mia preferred and the one she'd downgraded after a disappointing climbing structure assessment. He knew the route to his new office. He'd started at the design agency in mid-February. Good work, good people, a culture not entirely unlike Hayes Creative. And he knew the coffee place and the dry cleaner and the woman at the corner market who always gave Mia a sticker on the way to school, which Mia accepted with the gracious seriousness of a dignitary receiving a small diplomatic gift. He knew, incrementally, what it felt like to belong somewhere new. Charlotte and Mia had their own accumulation running in parallel, separate from Ethan and more important in some ways. Saturday mornings had become a regular three-person affair, not always structured, sometimes just the farmer's market, sometimes the park. Once a whale-watching excursion that Mia had campaigned for with the sustained strategic patience of a small person who understood that certain goals required a multi-week approach. The whale-watching had been cold, and the boat had moved more than Ethan's stomach had appreciated, and they had seen exactly one whale, briefly, at a distance that required binoculars. But Mia had described it afterward with the reverence of someone who had witnessed something genuinely transformative, and Charlotte had taken 4 photographs on her phone and set one as her lock screen without mentioning it, which Ethan had noticed and not commented on. Mia called Charlotte Charlotte still, not any other name, not a constructed title, just Charlotte. But the way she said it had changed from the careful neutrality of the park assessment in June to something warmer and more automatic, the way you said the name of someone who had become simply part of the landscape of your days. There was an evening in April when the 3 of them were making dinner. Ethan cooking, Mia nominally assisting in the capacity of someone who was stirring things and commenting on whether they needed more salt. Charlotte sitting at the kitchen table doing something on her laptop, all of them moving around the same space with the easy, unthinking familiarity of people who had been sharing a space for a long time. And Mia said, without looking up from the pot she was stirring with complete gravity, "Charlotte, do you think pasta needs more salt or is it fine?" Charlotte looked up from her laptop. "I think it's fine. Your dad knows pasta." "That's what he says," Mia said, in the tone of someone who was not yet convinced. "He's right about it." Mia considered this, looked at the pot, stirred twice more, and said, "Okay," in the way she said okay when she had received information from a source she'd decided to trust. Charlotte looked at Ethan over Mia's head, and her expression was the unguarded one, the one that had no professional overlay and no management strategy in it, just the face of a person who was somewhere real and knew it. He held her gaze for a second. Just that. Then he asked Mia to set the table, and the evening continued, ordinary and specific and entirely itself. That. He did not plan the proposal. This was, if he was honest with himself, slightly unlike him. He was a person who planned things, who moved carefully and with intention toward the things that mattered. But he had been living with the knowledge that he wanted to marry Charlotte Hayes for approximately 3 months before the evening in late May that it actually happened. And in those 3 months, he had not constructed a plan, because every time he started to build one, it felt wrong, too staged, too engineered, and Charlotte of all people deserved something that was honest rather than theatrical. What he had done was buy a ring in March, a simple one, not minimal as an aesthetic statement, but minimal because it was right, because Charlotte wore almost no jewelry, and when she did wear it, it was quiet and considered. He'd looked for something that matched how she moved through the world, and he'd found it. And he'd been carrying it in the inside pocket of his jacket for 8 weeks, which was a long time to carry something, and also, somehow, exactly right. It felt like the right kind of patience. The evening itself was a Saturday in late May. They had taken the bus to Baker Beach because Mia had decided that a particular project, an ocean drawing on actual beach sand, which she acknowledged was temporary and found interesting rather than discouraging, required a real beach, and Baker Beach had been Charlotte's suggestion because she'd found it in February while running and had been meaning to bring them there. It was not a warm evening. San Francisco in late May was not the warm ocean evening of a different city. There was a wind off the water, and they had all worn jackets, and Mia had her hat pulled down over her ears. The beach was not empty, but not crowded either. The light was doing the thing it did on the West Coast in the hour before sunset. Not golden exactly. More like the light was being filtered through something, a quality that made everything look slightly more itself than usual. The bridge was visible down the shoreline, the full span of it, rust-red and enormous, and entirely indifferent to the smallness of the 3 people walking near the water. Mia was 20 yards ahead of them, doing what she did on beaches, which was operating with the focus of a research scientist on a limited time budget, examining things, collecting objects of interest, discarding them after assessment, moving on. She had already found 2 interesting rocks and 1 piece of sea glass, and had opinions about all 3. Charlotte and Ethan walked without hurrying. The water was loud enough that conversation required a little effort, which meant the silences were full rather than empty. Her hand was in his. She'd taken his hand when they hit the sand, a thing she did now without deliberateness. He thought about a lot of things in that walk that he couldn't have fully articulated. He thought about the December party, and the champagne, and the 11-foot Christmas tree, and the thing he'd said. If you were sober right now, I'd be the one making the first move, which had been true then and was still true, just with more history behind it. He thought about the kitchen in January and the word ridiculous and the coffee shop and the first real conversation. He thought about Kara, the way he thought about her now, not as loss primarily, though that was always there, but as someone who had been real and had loved him and had given him Mia and who would have, he believed, wanted him to be standing on this beach. That was not a comfortable thought, exactly. It was an honest one. He thought about Mia at 3 years old, not understanding, asking for her mother with the specificity of a child who had not yet learned that some requests could not be answered. He thought about how he had answered those questions as best he could, honestly, without pretending, and how Mia had grown around the truth of it rather than hiding from it, and how that was who she was, a person who went toward real things and assessed them and found ways to incorporate them. Charlotte said, beside him, she found something. Mia was crouching down near the waterline with the absorbed focus of a scientist. She held something up, a shell, apparently significant. She always finds something, Ethan said. Charlotte was watching Mia with the expression she had when she didn't know she was being observed. The tender, careful, privately enormous look that she'd been showing him, incrementally, for over a year. The one that said, "This matters to me, and I am still learning how to say so." He stopped walking. Charlotte took another half step before she realized and turned to look at him. He was already moving, not dramatically, not with a prepared speech, just a man reaching into the inside pocket of his jacket and finding what had been there for 8 weeks and was ready to be somewhere else. He went down on one knee in the sand. The sand was cold and wet at the edge and not particularly comfortable, and none of that mattered in any way. Charlotte stared at him. She had the expression of a person who has been surprised in a way they did not expect to be surprised, which was significant because Charlotte Hayes was not easily surprised. Her hand came up to her mouth, not a practiced gesture, just the physical response of a person whose composure had encountered something it was not prepared to manage. "Charlotte?" His voice was steady. He'd been afraid it wouldn't be, and then it just was. "You told me in February that you'd spent most of your life building the thing you could control. And I watched you come out here and build something new in a place that didn't have your history in the walls. And I watched you let yourself be uncomfortable and stay anyway. And I watched you learn my daughter's preferred jellyfish anatomy and find the best park and be honest with me even when it was hard." He paused. "I'm not good at speeches. You know that." "You're doing fine," she said, and her voice was not steady at all. "I want to build the rest of it with you. Not because it's easy or because it's guaranteed, because it's real and you're real, and I haven't wanted anything this honestly in a very long time." He held up the ring. "Will you marry me?" For a second, she didn't say anything. He waited. He'd gotten good at waiting for Charlotte, understanding that she needed a moment when the thing was big enough, and this was the biggest thing he'd asked her, and he gave her the moment. Then she said, "Yes." Not with performance, not with the managed emotional response, just the word, plainly, entirely, with the full weight of everything she meant by it. He stood up and she closed the distance between them, and they held on to each other with the specific grip of two people who had each spent time not having anyone to hold on to and had not forgotten what that was. "Dad?" They separated because Mia's voice had the decibel level of a person who had assessed the situation and determined it required volume. She was 10 feet away, standing in the sand with her collected objects in one hand and her expression cycling through something that was partly the intense processing she brought to important information and partly something else, something younger, less composed, more like the 6-year-old she still was underneath the considerable architecture of her personality. "Did you ask her?" Mia said. "Yeah, Bug. I did." "What did she say?" Charlotte crouched down again. She still always crouched down, and looked at Mia directly. "I said yes," she said. "Is that okay with you?" Mia looked at Charlotte with the serious brown eyes that had been evaluating her since a park in June with ducks that were underrated and starfish that could grow their arms back. She looked for a long time, in the way she looked at things that mattered. "Yeah," Mia said. "That's okay." Then after a moment, she walked forward and let Charlotte put an arm around her shoulders, and she stayed there, not clinging, not performing, just staying. And the three of them stood at the water's edge with the bridge in the distance and the light going the way it went on the west coast before dark, everything slightly more itself than usual. There is a thing that happens to people who have survived real loss, who have stood at the bottom of something and looked up and understood with their whole body that the distance between who they were and who they needed to become was not a short walk. The thing that happens is that they stop taking certain things for granted, not in a performed, stated, inspirational caption way, just in the quiet, interior way of a person who knows what absence feels like and therefore knows what presence is worth. Ethan Brooks had stood at that bottom. He'd been 31 years old with a 3-year-old daughter and a life that had been structurally altered in an afternoon, and he had rebuilt himself, not back to what he was before, which was impossible, but forward, toward something that could hold the loss as part of its structure without being defined entirely by it. That was not a heroic thing. It was just the only other available option. Charlotte Hayes had never stood at the bottom the way he had, but she had built her walls high and her schedules tight for reasons that were real and earned. And she had, at a company Christmas party, with champagne and unguarded honesty, reached for something she couldn't fully manage and found, instead of what she expected, a man who looked at her like she was worth doing right. What Ethan understood, standing on a beach in the last light of a May evening, was that love wasn't the part that required courage. Love, once you were honest enough to see it, was the easy part. It declared itself whether you wanted it to or not, whether the timing was right or the situation was clean. He'd loved Charlotte before he'd said so, before the walk on the March sidewalk, before the coffee shop, before the kitchen in January. He'd loved her in the way that you loved a real person, incompletely, with full awareness of her complications and her walls and the eggs she couldn't cook, and the way she went silent when a problem had her, and the specific over-prepared quality she brought to situations she cared too much about. The part that required courage was the decision. The decision to stop holding the feeling at arm's length and walk toward it with your eyes open. The decision to introduce someone to your daughter. The decision to pack your life into a van in the rain and drive to a city you didn't know because the future was there and it was real. That part was the hard part. The love was just the thing that made the courage worth spending. He thought, sometimes, about what Mia had said on their walking conversation in September. I think you should go, if it's the real happy. And he thought about what it meant that a 7-year-old had understood, in 30 seconds of sidewalk wisdom, something that took most adults years of careful consideration to act on. Kids were like that, the ones who'd been told the truth about hard things. They developed a kind of clarity about what mattered that adults worked hard to get back after losing it. He thought about Mrs. Nguyen's hands on his shoulders in the hallway. You have been carrying for too long alone. She hadn't meant it as judgment. She'd meant it as permission, and permission, it turned out, was sometimes what you needed. Not advice, not a plan, not a clear-eyed risk assessment. Just someone who had lived long enough to know the shape of things telling you, it's okay to put some of it down. There were things that hadn't resolved cleanly. Ethan still had mornings where the weight of what he'd lost was present and specific, where he'd look at Mia across the breakfast table and feel simultaneously the completeness of what they were and the absence of what was missing, and he had learned to let both of those things be true at once, without forcing a resolution between them. He didn't think that would ever fully change, and he had stopped needing it to. Charlotte still sometimes went into the isolated problem-solving mode she'd promised to try to avoid. She was better at catching it, and she was better at opening the door when he knocked, but it wasn't a solved thing. It was an ongoing project, like most real things between real people. She was still more comfortable giving than receiving. She still brought too formal jackets to casual occasions and too much research to first-time situations. She had once, in March, sent Ethan a 12-bullet-point analysis of potential Mia school enrichment programs formatted like a client brief, which he had received without laughing, at least not in front of her, and which had contained, buried in bullet 7, the genuinely excellent suggestion that had led to Mia's current Saturday drawing class. These were the actual textures of their life together. Not the peak moments, the beach, the ring, the kiss on the March sidewalk. Those were real, and they mattered. But the texture was the mornings and the stuck kitchen drawers and Charlotte's rotation of 3 takeout places and Mia's running commentary on the quality of parks and the conversations at 10:30 at night when one of them said something honest that neither of them had fully known they were thinking. The texture was the accumulated, ordinary evidence of 3 people building something together that was not perfect, not finished, not guaranteed, and was exactly what it needed to be. A month after the engagement, Joanne came to visit. She stayed for 4 days and expressed opinions about San Francisco with the comprehensive authority of someone who had not been there before but had done research and was prepared to evaluate its claims. She liked the food, found the hills excessive, approved of the apartment in the qualified way she approved of things when she was trying not to be too effusive, and spent a full afternoon at the farmer's market with Mia in a state of such obvious mutual satisfaction that Ethan took a photograph and kept it. On the last night of the visit, after Mia was in bed, the 3 of them sat in the living room, and Joanne had wine and Charlotte had wine, and Ethan had the sparkling water he'd had at more company parties than he could count. Joanne and Charlotte had been doing the thing for 3 days where they were figuring each other out with the careful interest of 2 people who both loved the same person differently and were deciding what to make of each other, and by the 4th day it had settled into something easier and more direct. "You're good for him," Joanne said to Charlotte, in the tone she used when she had decided to just say the thing. Charlotte looked at her. "He's told me you don't give that assessment lightly." "He's right. I don't." A pause. He's also good for you. I don't know you that well yet, but I can see that. Yeah, Charlotte said. No deflection, just, yeah. Joanne looked at her brother. She's tougher than you probably thought initially. I knew pretty early, Ethan said. No, you thought she was smart. Tough is different. Charlotte was watching this exchange with the expression of a person who was simultaneously amused and slightly moved. Should I leave the room while you discuss me? No, stay, Joanne said. It's mostly complimentary. Mostly. I had some earlier concerns. They've been addressed. What were the concerns? Joanne looked at her with the frank, slightly challenging directness that was entirely characteristic. That you would do the thing that driven, successful people sometimes do when things get hard. Close up. Prioritize the work, make it clean. She set her wine down. That you'd put the company first when it cost you something to do otherwise. Charlotte didn't answer immediately. She looked at the table for a moment with the expression she had when she was being honest rather than defensive. That's a fair concern, she said. I'm not sure I've fully earned the address yet. It's something I work on. That's the right answer, Joanne said. People who say they fixed it are usually lying. I know what I'm capable of walking away from, Charlotte said quietly. I did it for years because it felt like control. I don't want to do it anymore. She paused. The people in this apartment are not something I'm capable of walking away from. I want to be clear about that. Joanne looked at her for a long moment. Then she picked up her wine and said, Good. And that was the extent of it, because Joanne was a person who said what she needed to say and then let it rest. Later, after Joanne had gone to bed, Ethan and Charlotte sat in the living room the way they did, close and quiet. And the bay window was dark with the late San Francisco evening, and the street below was as still as that street ever got. She loves you, Charlotte said. Your sister. She's doing the thing where she's careful about showing it, but it's there. I know. Mia does it too, the same way. She got it from you. He looked at her. What do I do? She thought about it honestly. You make people feel like it's safe to need you, she said. Like they can actually let themselves need something and it won't be used against them and you won't disappear. A pause. I don't take it for granted. I want you to know I don't. He didn't say anything for a moment. Outside, a car went past, the sound of it fading down the hill. I need you too, he said. I'm not sure I've said that directly. You show it. I know, but I'm saying it. She looked at him with the full face. The unmanaged, unarmored version, the one he'd first seen in the lobby light of a company party and had spent the better part of a year earning regular access to. The face that was just Charlotte, which was, he had long since concluded, the best face he knew. I know you do, she said. Mia turned 7 in April. They had a birthday party at the apartment. 6 kids from her class, an ocean theme that she had organized herself with the comprehensive authority of a child who had strong visual opinions, and a cake from the bakery that Ethan had ordered with the design Mia had sketched herself, which the bakery had reproduced with the specific imperfection of something hand-done and therefore better than perfect. Charlotte had sat at the kitchen table the night before the party, helping Mia make ocean decorations from blue and green paper, and Mia had directed the enterprise with the focused patience of someone who had a vision and was teaching a capable but uninitiated assistant how to execute it. There were paper jellyfish. There were paper fish with varying levels of anatomical accuracy that improved as the evening progressed. Charlotte had made a paper shark at Mia's instruction that Mia had assessed, tilting her head, and said, the teeth could be bigger. And Charlotte had made them bigger, and Mia had said better with the satisfaction of a person whose standards had been met. At some point during the party, Ethan had stood in the kitchen doorway watching Charlotte help 3 7-year-olds with a craft project involving glitter that was going to have consequences for the apartment's floor situation, and Mia had come to stand next to him for a moment, watching too, with the assessing expression that he knew well. She's good at this, Mia said. Yeah, she is. She wasn't at first, Mia said, with the objective accuracy of a scientist reviewing earlier data. She was kind of stiff. She was trying hard. I know. That's why I kept giving her chances. She looked up at him with the direct brown eyes. People who try hard deserve chances. He looked at his daughter, 7 years old, 2 weeks. Standing in the kitchen doorway, watching the woman he was going to marry help her friends make ocean decorations. Eating the ordinary birthday cake of an ordinary Saturday with the complete grounded certainty of a child who knew exactly where she was and that it was safe. "Where'd you get that?" he said. "People who try hard deserve chances." She shrugged. "You said it once, about Mrs. Nguyen learning to text." He hadn't remembered saying that. He must have, because Mia's memory was comprehensive and specific, and she didn't invent things. He'd said it to Mia once, probably not even as a lesson, just as an observation in passing, and she'd kept it. That was how it worked, he thought. That was how everything important actually got transmitted. Not through the speeches, not through the deliberate lessons, but through the offhand, honest things you said when you weren't trying to teach anything. The things that landed in a child's interior and became part of how they moved through the world. He had tried, in the years since Kara died, to be worth that, to say things worth keeping. He didn't always succeed. He lost his patience sometimes, got it wrong sometimes, was too tired sometimes to be the person he wanted to be. But he tried. And trying was what Mia had apparently filed away as the relevant standard. People who try hard deserve chances. He put his hand on the top of her head briefly, the way he did, and she allowed it for exactly 3 seconds before moving back into the party with the authority of a birthday girl who had organizational responsibilities. He watched her go. Then he looked at Charlotte, who had turned from the craft table at that moment, and found him watching and held the look for a second across the room, and her expression was the simple, specific one, not managed, not performed, not careful. Just this. This is what it's for. He nodded once. She turned back to the children and the glitter and the anatomically improving paper fish, and Ethan walked back into the party, back into the ordinary and specific Saturday of his real life, carrying the quiet, durable certainty of a man who had been through the bottom of things and had found, slowly and at considerable cost, and with the help of people who tried hard and deserved chances, his way back to something solid. Not perfect, not finished, not guaranteed, real, chosen, held. That was the whole of it. That was enough.